Good evening. Welcome to this space of stillness and discovery. Tonight, we walk together into the heart of what creates suffering in the human experience. Buddhist wisdom teaches that 3 mental poisons cloud our minds and keep us bound to cycles of pain: craving that never finds rest, aversion that burns from within, and ignorance that hides the truth of who we really are. These are not abstract ideas, but living forces you have felt countless times. If your heart calls you to connect, share with us which country you are listening from and what time it is where you are. From what corner of this vast world do you breathe alongside us tonight? This is a sanctuary for inner cultivation, a place to nourish the mind and awaken the spirit. Here, you need only be present, breathe deeply, and allow these words to guide you inward. Everything you need already lives within you. We are simply remembering what has always been there. If something in this journey resonates with the quiet truth inside you, return whenever you need this refuge. Subscribe to keep this haven of peace within reach. Now, take a slow breath, settle into this moment, and simply be here. The arrival at the monastery. Carrying what weighs. The path wound upward through ancient pines, their branches heavy with morning mist. A young traveller climbed slowly, pack strapped tight across shoulders that had carried worry for too many years. Each step felt heavier than the last, not from the mountain's steepness, but from the invisible weight of expectation, fear, and endless wanting. The monastery gates appeared through the fog like a promise half remembered. Wooden beams darkened by centuries of rain. Stone steps worn smooth by thousands of seeking feet. Somewhere beyond the walls, a bell sang 3 times, clear and patient. The traveller stopped at the threshold, uncertain. A figure sat motionless on a low bench near the entrance. An elderly monk wrapped in simple robes, the colour of rust and earth. His eyes were closed, but there was no sense of sleep in his stillness. Only vast awareness, like a lake reflecting sky. The traveller waited, unsure whether to speak or stay silent. Minutes passed. A bird called from the pine branches. The mist shifted, revealing then concealing the courtyard beyond. Finally, without opening his eyes, the old monk spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried the way temple bells carry across valleys. "Tell me," he said, "why have you come here?" The question opened something inside the traveller's chest. Words tumbled out in a torrent of confession. "I am restless, always wanting what I do not have. I am angry at the world, at myself, at circumstances beyond my control. I feel lost, like I am living in a fog where nothing makes sense. I have tried everything to find peace, but suffering follows me like my own shadow." The traveller's voice cracked with exhaustion. "I do not know what is wrong with me. I only know I cannot continue this way." The old monk finally opened his eyes. They were gentle, without judgment, but they saw everything. He gestured for the traveller to sit. "You have named your suffering honestly," the monk said. "That is the first step on any true path. But you have not yet seen the roots beneath what you feel. Suffering has many faces, many voices, but only 3 deep roots. In our tradition, we call them the 3 poisons. Greed, the craving that is never satisfied. Hatred, the aversion that pushes away what we do not want. And delusion, the ignorance that keeps us from seeing things as they truly are. These 3 twist together like serpents, feeding on each other, creating the world of pain you have been living in. The traveler listened, feeling something shift inside, a small opening of possibility. The monk stood slowly, his movements deliberate and unhurried. "You will stay here for a time," he said, "not to escape your suffering, but to understand it completely. We will look together at these 3 poisons. We will see how they work in the mind, how they create the prison you believe is real, and we will discover what remains when their power is released." The traveler felt both relief and terror at once. The journey had truly begun. The monk gestured toward the interior courtyard, where the scent of sandalwood incense drifted on the cool air. "Come," he said. "Let us begin with the simplest thing. Let us begin with just being here." The courtyard was a study in deliberate simplicity. Raked gravel formed patterns like frozen water. A stone basin held rainwater so still it mirrored the morning sky perfectly. Other monks moved through their tasks with quiet efficiency, sweeping paths, tending small plants, sitting in meditation beneath the overhang of the main hall. No one rushed. No one spoke unnecessarily. The traveler felt the contrast sharply against the constant noise and hurry of the life left behind. Here, time moved differently. Here, there was space to see what usually went unseen. The old monk pointed to a small room at the edge of the courtyard. "That will be your place," he said. "Rest now. Tomorrow, we begin to pull the weeds." The traveler bowed awkwardly, grateful beyond words, and walked toward the small room. Inside was a sleeping mat, a single cushion, a low table, nothing more. The bare simplicity felt like mercy. For the first time in months, perhaps years, the traveler set down the heavy pack and felt shoulders release their grip. Lying down on the mat, staring up at the wooden beams of the ceiling, exhaustion finally won its quiet battle. Sleep came swiftly, deep and dreamless. Outside, the bell rang again. The mist began to lift. In the main hall, the old monk lit 3 sticks of incense and placed them carefully in the sand of the offering bowl. Each stick of incense represented one of the 3 poisons the traveler would come to understand. The first stick, representing greed, burned with hungry flame. The second, representing hatred, glowed hot and red. The third, representing delusion, released smoke that obscured and confused the air around it. The monk watched them burn with patient attention. He had seen countless seekers arrive at these gates, each carrying the same fundamental suffering in different costumes. The teaching never changed because the human heart never changed. Only the seeing changed. Only the willingness to look directly at what had always been there, hiding in plain sight. As dawn broke fully over the mountains, light streamed through the high windows of the meditation hall. The monk closed his eyes and returned to his own practice, that ancient art of simply being present without grasping, without pushing away, without mistaking the stories of the mind for truth. Decades of practice had not made him perfect. The 3 poisons still arose in his own awareness, but they no longer ruled him. They no longer convinced him of their reality. They were like clouds passing through the vast sky of awareness, temporary visitors with no power to stain what was fundamentally clear and awake. This was what he would teach the traveler. Not perfection, but freedom. Not the absence of poisons, but the wisdom that sees through them. In the small room at the edge of the courtyard, the traveler slept on, unaware that the real journey had already begun in that first honest naming of suffering. Tomorrow would bring the next teaching. Tomorrow, hands would touch soil and pull at roots, and the first poison would begin to reveal itself not as an idea, but as a living force moving through body and mind. The monastery held space for this ancient unfolding, with the patience of stone, the gentleness of mist, the clarity of morning bells calling all beings to wake up, to see clearly, to remember what they had always been beneath the fog of the three poisons. And so the night turned toward day, and the journey continued in silence, the garden of weeds, roots run deep. Morning arrived cool and clear, the last traces of mist retreating into the valleys below. The traveller woke to the sound of wooden clappers echoing through the courtyard, calling the monastery to its rhythm of practice and work. Muscles ached from the long climb the day before, but there was also a strange lightness, as if something heavy had been set down during sleep. After washing face and hands in cold water from the stone basin, the traveller found the old monk waiting near a small wooden gate at the far end of the courtyard. He held 2 pairs of worn gloves and a simple basket woven from bamboo. "Today," he said, "we work in the garden." Beyond the gate lay a plot of earth about the size of a meditation hall, bordered by a low stone wall. Vegetable plants grew in careful rows, leafy greens, herbs, climbing beans on wooden trellises. But between the intentional plants, other growth had appeared. Wild grasses pushed up between the vegetables. Broad-leafed weeds sprawled across the pathways. Vining plants with tiny thorns wrapped around the bean poles, choking them. The monk handed 1 pair of gloves to the traveller and pulled on his own with practiced ease. "We will clear this space together," he said, "but we will do it with attention. Not rushing, not judging. Simply seeing what is here and what needs to be released." They knelt on opposite sides of a row thick with weeds. The traveller began pulling at the visible growth, yanking leaves and stems and tossing them into the basket. It felt good to do something concrete, something physical after so much mental confusion. Within minutes, a satisfying pile of green and brown had accumulated. The monk worked more slowly, his movements deliberate. He did not simply pull at the surface growth. Instead, he dug his fingers deep into the soil around each weed, feeling for where the root began, following it down, extracting the entire structure from the earth. When he pulled, the weed came out completely, soil clinging to a long, pale taproot that had been invisible from above. After some time, the monk paused and gestured to the area the traveller had cleared. "It looks clean now," he said, "but watch what happens." He brushed aside the loose soil where the traveller had been working. There, just beneath the surface, pale root structures remained intact, already sending up tiny new shoots. "These will be full grown again within days," the monk said. If we only address what we can see on the surface, the problem returns endlessly. We exhaust ourselves fighting the same battles again and again. The suffering never ends because we never address the true source. The traveller looked down at the hands, at the pile of torn leaves and stems, suddenly understanding that this was not just about gardening. "The 3 poisons work exactly this way," the monk continued, sitting back on his heels. "You told me yesterday that you are restless, angry, confused. These are the leaves and stems, the visible signs of suffering. But beneath them are roots you have not yet seen. Craving is a root. Aversion is a root. Delusion is a root. They run deep in the mind, fed by years of habit and misunderstanding. When you try to fix your life by changing circumstances, by getting what you want or avoiding what you fear, you are pulling leaves. The roots remain untouched, and soon the same suffering sprouts again in a new form. True freedom requires going deeper. The traveller felt the truth of this in the body, a recognition that went beyond words. How many times had the same patterns repeated? a new relationship that promised happiness but ended in familiar pain. A new job that seemed like the answer but brought the same dissatisfaction. A new place to live, a new hobby, a new distraction, all of them temporary relief before the old restlessness returned. It was exhausting. It was endless. And now, kneeling in dirt with gloved hands and aching knees, the traveler saw the pattern clearly for the first time. The problem was not out there in the world. The problem was in the roots, in the unseen forces driving every reaction, every choice, every moment of suffering. They worked in silence for a long time after that, but now the traveler tried to imitate the monk's approach, feeling for the root, following it down, extracting it completely. It was slower, more difficult, required more patience. Some roots went surprisingly deep, resisting the pull, requiring careful excavation. Others had spread sideways underground, connecting multiple plants in a hidden network. It was humbling to see how much was happening beneath the surface, how much had been invisible despite being right there all along. The garden became a mirror, reflecting back the inner landscape of the mind with its hidden patterns and unseen architecture of habit. The sun climbed higher. Sweat dampened the traveler's back. The basket filled with weeds, roots, and all. Finally, the monks stood and stretched, surveying their work with satisfaction. "This is good," he said. "Tomorrow, we will do this again. And the day after." Tending the garden is not a task we complete once and forget. It is an ongoing practice, a continuous seeing and releasing. The same is true for the mind. We do not eradicate the 3 poisons in a single moment of insight. We learn to recognize them when they arise, to see their roots clearly, and to release them with patient attention. Over time, they lose their power. Over time, the ground of the mind becomes more spacious, more fertile for what truly nourishes. As they walked back toward the courtyard, the monk paused at the gate. "We have been speaking of roots in general," he said, "but now it is time to look at each poison specifically. Tomorrow, we will begin with the first. We will explore the nature of craving, of wanting, of the thirst that is never satisfied. You will see how it operates in your own experience, not as a concept, but as a living force." The Buddha taught that this craving is the origin of suffering. Understanding it completely is the beginning of liberation. The traveler nodded, feeling both curiosity and a slight tremor of fear. Something was being asked here, a willingness to see what had always been carefully avoided. That evening, after a simple meal of rice and vegetables eaten in silence with the other monks, the traveler sat alone on the steps of the small room and watched the sun set behind the mountains. The sky turned orange, then pink, then deep purple. Stars began to appear one by one. In the mind, the day's teaching turned over slowly, roots and leaves, surface and depth, the endless cycle of suffering and the possibility of something else. Somewhere in the monastery, a bell rang softly. The day ended as it had begun, held in the vast patience of ancient practice. Tomorrow would bring the next step on the path. Tomorrow, the first poison would reveal itself. And the traveler would learn to see with new eyes what had been there all along, hidden in plain sight, waiting to be understood. The first poison, the thirst that never ends. The next morning arrived with the same wooden clappers, the same cool air, the same routine of washing and gathering. But today felt different to the traveler. There was an edge of anticipation, a sense that something important was about to be revealed. After the morning sitting meditation in the main hall, silent and still as stone. The monks filed into the dining area for the first meal. The traveller followed, taking a place on a cushion at one of the low tables. A monk with silver hair and gentle hands moved through the room, ladling rice porridge into each person's bowl. The scent of ginger and sesame rose with the steam. The old monk sat across from the traveller and gestured to begin. The room fell into eating meditation, each person bringing full attention to the simple act of nourishing the body. The traveller lifted the bowl, felt its warmth in both hands, brought a spoonful to the lips. The porridge was perfect, creamy and subtly sweet. But even as the first taste registered, the mind was already moving ahead, wanting the next bite, wanting more ginger flavour, wanting the meal to last longer because it was pleasant, wanting. An endless current beneath every moment of experience, barely noticed but always present, always pulling attention away from what was actually here. The traveller watched a senior monk seated nearby, a man with a weathered face and eyes that seemed to hold oceans. He ate with complete presence, each movement economical and graceful. Lifting the spoon, tasting, chewing slowly, swallowing, pausing. There was no hurry, no grasping at the experience, no attempt to make it other than it was. When his bowl was empty, he set it down with the same careful attention and sat quietly, hands resting in his lap, not reaching for more, not wanting what had already passed. The traveller felt the contrast sharply. Even now, with food still in the bowl, the mind was restless, already thinking about what came next, already wanting something other than this. After the meal, the old monk invited the traveller to walk with him around the perimeter of the monastery grounds. They moved slowly along a path that wound through bamboo groves and past small shrines weathered by rain and time. The monk began to speak, his voice soft but clear. "What you experienced during the meal," he said, "is the first of the 3 poisons. In our tradition, we call it lobha or tanha. In your language, you might say greed, craving, or thirst. It is the mind's constant reaching for what is not here, the belief that happiness lives in the next moment, the next experience, the next acquisition. It is the voice that says, 'This is not enough, I am not enough, I need more to be complete.' This poison is subtle and pervasive," the monk continued. "It does not only appear in obvious greed for money or possessions. It shows up in the craving for comfort when we feel discomfort, in the desire for praise and recognition, in the hunger for pleasure and the fear of its ending, in the subtle ways we grasp at experiences, trying to hold them, trying to make them permanent. Even spiritual seeking can become a form of craving, wanting enlightenment, wanting to be free, wanting to be someone other than who we are right now. The very wanting perpetuates the sense of lack it seeks to fill. It is a trap that tightens the more we struggle." They paused at a clearing where a small stream ran over smooth stones, its sound a constant murmur of letting go. The monk gestured to the water. "See how it flows," he said. "It does not cling to the rocks. It does not try to hold on to any particular form or location. It simply moves according to its nature, and in that natural movement, it finds its way to the ocean. But the mind infected by craving is like a hand trying to grasp water. The tighter we grip, the more slips through our fingers. We exhaust ourselves trying to hold what cannot be held, trying to make permanent what is inherently flowing and changing. This exhaustion, this frustration, this sense of perpetual inadequacy, this is the suffering born from the poison of craving." The traveller felt something painful and true being touched. How much energy had been spent chasing after things, people, experiences, believing that finally getting them would bring lasting peace. And how many times had that peace dissolved almost immediately, leaving only the familiar hunger for the next thing? It was like drinking salt water to quench thirst. Each drink only increased the craving. Each acquisition only revealed a deeper sense of lack. The pattern was endless, exhausting, and seemingly inescapable. And yet, here was this monk, standing peacefully by a stream, apparently free from that constant internal pressure. How? What did he know that made such freedom possible? The Buddha taught that craving arises from a fundamental misunderstanding, the monk said, as if hearing the unspoken question. We believe that we are separate, isolated selves who lack something essential. We believe that happiness exists outside of us, in objects, in experiences, in the approval of others. And so we reach outward constantly, trying to fill an inner emptiness that cannot be filled from outside. This is the delusion that feeds the craving. When we see through this delusion, when we recognize that our true nature is already whole and complete, the craving loses its power. Not because we suppress it or fight against it, but because we see clearly that it is based on a false premise. They began walking again, the path ascending gently toward a grove of ancient cedars. The traveler's mind churned with questions, resistances, old patterns of thought reasserting themselves. But what about legitimate needs? What about wanting good things, wanting to help others, wanting to grow and learn? The monk smiled slightly, as if this question had been asked 1,000 times before. There is a difference between natural preference and toxic craving, he said. The body needs food, this is natural. But the mind that cannot be satisfied, that always wants more or better or different, this is craving. We can care for needs and work toward beneficial goals without the desperate grasping that characterizes the poison. The key is in the quality of mind, not in the actions themselves. As they reached the cedar grove, the monk stopped and placed his palm against the rough bark of one massive tree. This tree does not crave to be taller than it is, he said. It does not suffer because it is not an oak or a pine. It simply grows according to its nature, receiving what comes, releasing what goes, standing present in each season without complaint or grasping. This is the teaching nature offers us constantly. Be what you are, receive what is given, release what passes, meet each moment with open hands rather than clenched fists. The traveler reached out and touched the tree as well, feeling the solid reality of it, the aliveness humming beneath the bark, the complete absence of wanting to be other than exactly this. Suzuki Roshi once taught, the monk said softly, when you stand with your hands open, you can receive everything. When your fists are clenched, you can hold nothing. This is the essence of the teaching on craving. We believe that grasping will give us security, but it only creates suffering. True security comes from releasing the grip, from trusting the natural abundance of each moment, from recognizing that we already have everything we need in the simple fact of being alive and aware. This is not passivity or resignation. It is a profound shift in how we meet experience, from grasping to allowing, from demanding to receiving, from lack to sufficiency. They stood together in the cathedral of cedars, light filtering down through layers of green branches, birdsong weaving through the silence. The traveler felt something begin to soften in the chest, some old tight knot of perpetual hunger beginning to loosen just slightly. It was not a dramatic transformation, not a sudden liberation, just a small opening, a glimpse of what might be possible if this teaching could be lived fully. The path ahead was long, But at least now the first poison had been named, seen clearly, understood in a way that went beyond intellectual knowing. As they turned to walk back toward the monastery, the traveler felt ready for what would come next. The journey into the heart of suffering had truly begun. The lesson of water and cup, holding emptiness. The days began to settle into rhythm. Morning meditation before dawn, the hall dark except for a single candle flame. Breakfast in silence, each bite an opportunity to notice the craving mind and its endless commentary. Work periods in the garden, in the kitchen, sweeping paths, washing bowls. The traveler moved through these tasks with growing attention, beginning to see how every activity revealed the same pattern. The reaching, the grasping, the subtle tension of wanting things to be different than they were. It was exhausting to witness, and yet there was something liberating in the seeing itself. What had been invisible was now becoming apparent, and that very awareness created space around the old compulsions. One afternoon, the heat arrived early and thick. The sun beat down on the courtyard with unusual intensity for the season. The traveler had been working for hours, splitting wood for the kitchen fires, and thirst had grown into a demanding presence. Throat dry, lips parched, every thought oriented toward the relief of cold water. The old monk appeared as if summoned by need itself, carrying a simple clay cup filled to the brim with water so clear it caught the light like crystal. He offered it without words. The traveler took it with both hands, brought it to lips, and drank deeply. The sensation was exquisite, perfect, every cell seeming to sigh with gratitude. The water was cool, pure, exactly what was needed. But as the last drops disappeared and the cup emptied, something interesting happened in the mind. Instead of simply setting the cup down and returning to work, the traveler found hands gripping it tightly, reluctant to let it go. What if there was no more water later? What if thirst returned and no one was there to offer relief? The mind spun stories of future lack, future need, future suffering, and so the hands held on, clutching the empty cup as if it still contained what had already been received and integrated. The monk watched this with patient interest, saying nothing, simply witnessing the small drama of attachment playing out in real time. After a long moment, the monk extended his hand gently. The traveler hesitated, then reluctantly released the cup. The monk walked to the stone well at the edge of the courtyard, lowered the wooden bucket, and drew up fresh water. He filled the cup again to overflowing and brought it back, offering it once more. "Drink," he said. The traveler drank again, confusion mixing with gratitude. When the cup was empty this second time, the monk spoke. "Tell me, what were you holding when you gripped the empty cup?" The traveler looked down at hands that had been so tense moments before. "Nothing," came the quiet answer. "I was holding nothing." "Yes," the monk said, settling onto a bench in the shade. "You were holding nothing, but the mind believed it was holding security. This is how craving creates suffering. We grasp at what has already passed, trying to keep it, trying to guarantee its return. We hoard, we protect, we build walls around empty cups, convinced that this will keep us safe. But safety does not come from holding tightly to anything. Safety comes from trusting that what is needed will arrive when it is needed. The well is full. The water flows. When you are thirsty and the time is right, you drink. This is the natural way, the way of the Tao, the way of open hands and trusting heart. The traveler sat down beside him, feeling the teachings settle into the body. How many empty cups had been clutched over the years? old relationships long finished but never released, past accomplishments gripped as proof of worth, material possessions accumulated not from need but from fear of future lack, even ideas and beliefs held with white-knuckled intensity, afraid that letting them go meant falling into some terrible void. All of it, the monk seemed to be saying, was the same pattern. Grasping at emptiness, trying to make permanent what was always flowing, creating suffering in the attempt to prevent it. But this feels dangerous, the traveler said carefully. If I stop trying to secure my future, if I stop planning and saving and protecting, will I not be left vulnerable and unprepared? The monk smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening with warmth. There is a difference between wise preparation and fearful hoarding, he said. We can gather firewood for winter without clutching it in terror. We can save food without convincing ourselves that there will never be enough. The difference is in the quality of mind. Are we acting from wisdom and care or from fear and craving? One leads to appropriate action. The other leads to a prison of anxiety, an endless accumulation that never brings peace. He gestured toward the mountains visible beyond the monastery walls. Look at the seasons, he said. Spring does not hoard the blossoms, afraid that summer will not come. Summer does not cling to its warmth, terrified of autumn's approach. Each season gives fully what it has to give, then releases and makes space for what comes next. Trees let go of every leaf, trusting completely that new leaves will come when the time is right. This is not carelessness. This is profound trust in the intelligence of life itself. When we align with this natural flow, we find that we are cared for, not because we control everything, but because we have stopped fighting the fundamental generosity of existence. The traveler felt resistance and recognition warring inside. Part of the mind wanted to argue, to defend the old ways of trying to secure happiness through control and accumulation. But another part, quieter and deeper, sensed the truth being pointed toward. How much lighter it would be to live with open hands. How much energy would be freed if the constant grasping could relax. Not as a practice of denial or asceticism, but as a natural expression of trust. Trusting that this moment contains what is needed. Trusting that when the next moment arrives, it too will bring what is required. Trusting the flow rather than fighting it with endless attempts to dam and divert and control. Thich Nhat Hanh teaches, the monk said after a long silence, that we already have enough conditions to be happy. Right now, in this moment, there is enough. Enough air to breathe, enough ground to stand on, enough light to see by. But the mind infected with craving cannot recognize this sufficiency. It is always reaching past this moment towards some imagined future where finally, everything will be okay. And so it misses the only place where peace has ever existed. Right here, right now. Not in getting what we want, but in releasing the belief that we are lacking anything essential. The traveler closed eyes and took a slow breath, trying to feel into this teaching, trying to let it be more than words. When eyes opened again, the monk was standing, ready to return to the afternoon's tasks. He placed the clay cup carefully on the stone ledge of the well. It sits empty now, he said, but it is not lacking anything. Its emptiness is what allows it to be filled when water comes. Be like this cup, empty of grasping, open to what arrives. Trusting that the well is always full, that life provides what is needed in its proper time. This is the antidote to the poison of craving, not suppression, not denial, but a fundamental shift from lack to sufficiency, from fear to trust, from closed fists to open hands. Tomorrow, we will look at the second poison. Tomorrow, we explore what happens when the mind pushes away instead of pulling toward. But for now, rest in this. You have enough. You are enough. This moment is enough. Inner storm. When the mind says no. That evening, the monastery prepared for extended meditation practice. Once each week, the monks sat through the night in what they called the vigil of wakefulness, a practice of maintaining awareness through the hours when the world slept. The traveller had been invited to join, and though the body was tired from the day's work, there was also curiosity about what might be discovered in the deep stillness of darkness. As twilight faded into night, the meditation hall filled with silent figures taking their places on cushions arranged in rows. Candles were lit at the altar. Incense smoke rose in slow spirals. The old monk rang the bell 3 times, and the vigil began. The first hour passed easily enough. The body settled, the breath found its rhythm, the mind wandered and returned, wandered and returned. Outside, crickets sang their ancient song. Inside, the silence deepened until it seemed to have texture and weight. But as the second hour stretched on, discomfort began to announce itself. A dull ache in the left knee, tension building in the lower back, an itch on the shoulder that grew from minor irritation to demanding presence. The traveller shifted slightly, trying to find relief, but the movement only seemed to amplify awareness of every point of contact, every place where the body protested its stillness. By the third hour, the discomfort had transformed into pain, and with the pain came a rising tide of resistance. The mind began its familiar litany of complaints. This is too much. This is unnecessary. Why am I doing this? I should stop. I should leave. Who decided this was a good idea? Anger flickered at the edges of awareness, anger at the cushion for being hard, at the body for being weak, at the practice for demanding so much, at the self for agreeing to this in the first place. The aversion grew teeth, became a living thing that wanted nothing more than to escape, to make the discomfort stop, to return to safety and ease and control. But something kept the traveller on the cushion. Perhaps stubbornness, perhaps genuine curiosity about what lay on the other side of this resistance. The breath became an anchor, something to return to again and again, as waves of aversion crashed through the mind. Breathing in, acknowledging the pain. Breathing out, softening around it. Not trying to make it go away, but also not drowning in it. Creating space, allowing it to be without letting it become the whole world. And in that space, something unexpected began to happen. The pain was still present, but it was no longer solid. It flickered and pulsed and changed intensity from moment to moment. It was not one monolithic thing called pain, but a constantly shifting symphony of sensations. As the 4th hour arrived, bringing the deepest point of night with it, the old monk rose silently from his cushion and moved through the hall like a shadow. He paused beside the traveller, then settled onto the floor nearby, sitting in the same direction, offering presence without words. The simple act of his being there shifted something. The traveller was not alone in this struggle. Others had sat through nights of pain and resistance before. Others had met the aversion and learned to hold it with awareness rather than being consumed by it. The monk's steady breath became audible in the silence, a reminder that it was possible to be present with difficulty without being destroyed by it. After a time that could have been minutes or hours, all sense of time having dissolved in the darkness, the monk whispered so quietly, the words seemed to arrive from inside rather than outside. What you are meeting now is the second poison. We call it dosa, aversion, hatred, the mind's resistance to what is present. It is the voice that says no to life, that pushes away discomfort, that wages war against anything unpleasant or unwanted. It seems protective, seems like it is trying to keep you safe, but notice how it multiplies suffering. The pain in your knee is one thing. The anger at the pain, the resistance to it, the stories about how wrong this is, these create a second layer of suffering that is often more intense than the original discomfort. The traveler recognized the truth of this immediately. The physical sensations were difficult, yes, but bearable. What made them unbearable was the mental and emotional resistance, the constant pushing away, the internal war against what was actually happening. It was like being caught in a rip current and fighting against it, exhausting all energy in a futile battle that only led to drowning. The monk seemed to sense this recognition. Aversion convinces us that our suffering will end when circumstances change, he continued. When the pain stops, when the difficult person leaves, when the unpleasant situation resolves. But this is a trap. As long as we are at war with what is present, we suffer regardless of circumstances. Peace comes not from controlling external conditions, but from changing our relationship to them. The traveler sat with this teaching as the night deepened further. Around the hall, other monks remained motionless as stones, their practice steady and mature. What was their relationship to discomfort that allowed such equanimity? How had they trained the mind to stop its constant judgment and resistance? The monk spoke again, his words arriving in the spaces between breaths. Aversion wears many masks, he said. Sometimes it appears as obvious anger or hatred, but it also shows up as subtle irritation, as impatience, as judgment of others, as disappointment when things do not meet expectations. It is there every time the mind says this should not be happening, every time we brace against reality as it is. And each instance of aversion is like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. This image landed with force. How much poison had been swallowed over the years? How many moments of anger at traffic, at weather, at other people's behavior, at the body's limitations, at life's refusal to conform to preferences and demands? And who had suffered from all that anger? Not the traffic, not the weather, not the other people, only the one carrying the poison, only the one at war with what could not be changed through force of will. The futility of it became suddenly, painfully obvious. And in that seeing, the first crack appeared in the armor of aversion. Maybe there was another way. Maybe resistance was optional. Maybe peace was available even in the midst of difficulty. As if reading these thoughts, the monk placed a hand briefly on the traveler's shoulder, a gesture of encouragement and solidarity. The Buddha taught, he whispered, that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Pain is what happens in the body. Suffering is what happens when the mind resists pain, fights it, makes it mean something about who we are, or how life should be. When we can meet pain with acceptance, with curiosity even, it loses much of its power to create suffering. Not because we become numb or indifferent, but because we stop adding fuel to the fire of aversion. We simply allow what is present to be present, and in that allowing, we find an unexpected freedom. The traveler breathed into this possibility, testing it carefully, allowing the knee pain without trying to fix it or make it mean something terrible, allowing the fatigue without judgment, allowing the difficulty of the practice without turning it into evidence of personal failure. And in that allowing, something did shift. Not a dramatic transformation, not the pain vanishing magically, but a subtle easing of the suffering around the pain. A small space opening up. A sense that perhaps it was possible to be with difficulty without being destroyed by it. The vigil continued through the remaining hours of darkness, and the traveler continued to practice this new relationship to experience, meeting what arose with awareness rather than war, breathing space around what could not be changed, learning the first lessons in the ancient art of letting be. When dawn finally arrived, pale light filtering through the high windows, the bell rang again, and the vigil concluded. Monks rose stiffly and filed out in silence to prepare for the morning routine. The traveler stood slowly, every joint announcing itself, every muscle tender and awake. But there was also a strange exhilaration, a sense of having passed through something difficult and emerged changed. The old monk waited near the door. He nodded slightly, acknowledging what had been learned in the darkness. "Tomorrow," he said, "I will show you something that will make this teaching even clearer. For now, rest. You have done well." And the traveler bowed, grateful beyond words for this strange, difficult, essential teaching that was slowly revealing how to live without being at constant war with life itself. The monk and the wasp. Allowing what arrives. The morning after the vigil brought a bone-deep fatigue, but also a clarity that had not been present before. The traveler moved through the early routines slowly, savoring the simple relief of movement after so many hours of stillness. Breakfast tasted richer than usual, the warm rice porridge a gift received with genuine appreciation. Even the ache in joints felt oddly welcome, proof of having stayed present through difficulty, having met the edge of aversion and learned something essential about its nature. The day unfolded with gentle tasks, the monastery's rhythm accommodating the needs of bodies that had practiced through the night. In the late morning, the old monk invited everyone to gather in the main meditation hall for a teaching session. It was unusual to interrupt the work period, but the monks came readily, settling onto cushions with the ease of long familiarity. The traveler took a place near the back, curious about what would be shared. Sunlight streamed through the open doors, carrying with it the scent of pine and warm earth. Birds called from the surrounding trees. The atmosphere was relaxed, spacious, held in the gentle attention of the assembled community. The old monk sat at the front, waiting until everyone had arrived and settled before beginning to speak. He spoke first of the previous night's vigil, acknowledging the difficulty many had faced, honoring the commitment to stay present through discomfort. He spoke of aversion as a natural response of the nervous system, the body's ancient wisdom trying to move away from threat and pain. There was nothing wrong with this response, he said. It had kept humans alive for millennia. But when we are safe, when there is no actual threat, the habit of aversion can become a prison. We push away experiences that are merely uncomfortable, labeling them as unbearable, going to war with our own lives in countless small ways throughout each day. The practice teaches us to discern between actual danger and mere discomfort, to meet the latter with equanimity rather than resistance. As he spoke these words, a wasp flew through the open door, its buzz sharp and insistent in the quiet hall. Several monks noticed its entrance, but no one moved. The insect circled the space, exploring, seeking whatever it was seeking. The traveler felt the body tense instinctively, the old programming of aversion activating. Wasps could sting. Wasps were dangerous. The mind wanted to track its location, prepare to defend, maybe swat it away or flee if it came too close. But the monks around the hall remained still, attention resting in their practice, acknowledging the wasp's presence without reacting to it. The old monk continued speaking as if nothing had changed, his voice steady and calm. The wasp made several lazy circles near the ceiling, then descended, flying lower now, weaving between the seated figures. The traveller watched it approach a monk sitting 3 rows ahead, an elderly man with a shaved head that reflected the morning light. The wasp landed on his bare forearm, its legs making tiny contact with skin. The traveller held breath, waiting for the inevitable reaction, the flinch, the swat, the disruption. But the monk did not move. He sat completely still, awareness clearly present, watching the insect explore his arm with delicate movements of its antennae. There was no contraction visible in his face, no tightening, no bracing against what might happen. Only steady presence, meeting what was actually occurring rather than the fearful story about what might occur. The wasp walked slowly up the monk's forearm toward his elbow, pausing occasionally as if considering its options. Time seemed to stretch, each second expanding into spaciousness. The old monk at the front had stopped speaking, allowing everyone to witness this living teaching unfolding in real time. The wasp reached the monk's elbow, then lifted off suddenly, buzzing back into the air. It circled once more, then found the open door and disappeared into the brightness outside. A collective exhale moved through the hall, tension releasing that no one had consciously acknowledged holding. The elderly monk smiled slightly, rubbing his arm where the insect had walked, then returned his hands to his lap and his attention to the present moment. The old monk spoke into the charged silence. "You have just witnessed a profound teaching," he said. "What you saw was not indifference or numbness. It was acceptance. Our brother did not invite the wasp, but he also did not wage war against it. He allowed it to be what it was, to do what it was doing, without adding the suffering of resistance and fear. He recognized that the wasp was not attacking, merely exploring, and that remaining still was actually the safest response. Fighting would have created danger where none existed. This is the wisdom we cultivate through practice, the ability to discern clearly and respond appropriately rather than reacting from ancient patterns of aversion. The traveller felt something shift internally, a recognition landing deeper than words. How many wasps had been met with fear and aggression over the years? How many situations that were merely uncomfortable had been treated as life-threatening emergencies? And how much suffering had that created? The constant vigilance, the perpetual defensiveness, the exhaustion of always being at war with what appeared in experience. The monk had shown another possibility, meeting what arrives with clear seeing and steady presence. Not controlling, not avoiding, simply allowing reality to be what it is and responding with wisdom rather than reflex. But what if he had been stung? The question arose from someone in the group, voicing what many were surely thinking. The old monk nodded, appreciating the question. Then he would have been stung, he said simply. Pain would have arisen, been present for a time, then passed. This is the nature of pain. It comes, it stays, it goes. But notice the difference. If he had panicked and swatted at the wasp, a sting would have been more likely. If he had been stung while remaining calm, he would have experienced pain, but not the added suffering of anger, victimhood, or the story that something terrible and unjust had happened. He would have simply met pain as another experience arising and passing in awareness. This is what we practice. Not the elimination of all difficulty, but the elimination of unnecessary suffering layered on top of difficulty. The teaching continued, weaving together the previous night's vigil and this morning's wasp into a coherent understanding of aversion and its antidote. The old monk spoke of the difference between response and reaction. Reaction is automatic, driven by conditioning and habit, usually rooted in aversion or craving. Response is conscious, arising from clear seeing, appropriate to the actual situation rather than to our fears about the situation. The practice trains us to create space between stimulus and response, to pause, to see clearly, to choose wisely rather than being hijacked by ancient programming that no longer serves. The traveler listened with complete attention, feeling each word land like a stone dropping into still water, ripples spreading outward, changing everything subtly but irrevocably. As the teaching session concluded and monks began to disperse back to their daily tasks, the traveler approached the elderly monk who had hosted the WASP. There was a desire to understand more deeply, to learn how such equanimity was cultivated. The old man smiled kindly and gestured for them to walk together. They moved slowly through the courtyard, pausing by the stone basin where water reflected sky. Many years ago, the elderly monk said, "I was like you." Every small discomfort felt like a crisis. Every unpleasant sensation triggered resistance and fear. But through practice, through sitting with difficulty again and again, through learning to breathe space around what could not be changed, something shifted. I began to trust that I could be with whatever arose. Not because I became superhuman, but because I stopped believing the stories about how fragile I was. We are much stronger than we think, much more resilient. But we only discover this by testing the edges, by staying present when every instinct screams to flee. They stood together in companionable silence, watching small fish move lazily in the basin's depths. The traveler felt gratitude for this encounter, for the living example of what the teachings pointed toward. It was one thing to hear about equanimity, another entirely to witness it embodied, to see that it was actually possible for a human being to meet difficulty without collapsing into aversion. If this monk could do it, perhaps anyone could. Perhaps it was simply a matter of practice, of patient training, of slowly rewiring the ancient circuits of resistance into new patterns of acceptance and presence. The journey was long, but the destination was becoming visible. And that visibility itself was a gift, a source of encouragement for the difficult work that lay ahead. The second poison, fire that consumes. The afternoon brought cooler air as clouds gathered over the mountains, promising rain before nightfall. The old monk found the traveler in the woodshed, stacking split logs in careful rows, and suggested a walk into the forest beyond the monastery grounds. They took a narrow path that wound upward through dense undergrowth, stepping over roots and ducking beneath low branches. The air smelled rich with decomposition and growth happening simultaneously, that distinctive scent of forest floor where death feeds life in endless cycles. Neither spoke as they climbed, saving breath for the ascent, letting the forest speak its own teachings through bird call and rustling leaves and the distant sound of water moving over stone. After perhaps half an hour of steady walking, they emerged into a small clearing. At its center stood the remains of a large tree, clearly struck by lightning at some point in the past. The trunk was split down the middle, its interior charred black and hollow. Branches that had once reached towards sky now lay scattered on the ground, slowly returning to soil. The destruction was complete, the tree reduced to a burnt shell, no longer alive in any recognizable way. But around this monument to fire's destructive power, new life flourished with startling intensity. Young saplings pushed up from the ash-enriched earth. Ferns unfurled bright green fronds. Wildflowers dotted the clearing with spots of purple and yellow, death and life intertwined so completely that separation between them became meaningless. The old monk settled onto a fallen log at the clearing's edge and gestured for the traveler to join him. They sat together, witnessing the scene in silence. Finally, the monk spoke, his voice soft but carrying clearly in the open space. "This tree was struck many years ago," he said. "The fire burned hot and fierce, consuming everything it touched. By the time the flames died, this great being that had stood for perhaps a century was reduced to ash and char. The fire cared nothing for the tree's age, its beauty, the birds that nested in its branches, the shade it provided. Fire simply consumes. This is its nature, and aversion, the second poison we are exploring, is exactly like this fire." He paused, letting the comparison settle. "Aversion burns," he continued. "It destroys first and most completely the one who carries it. When we hold hatred, resentment, anger, irritation, we believe we are protecting ourselves or punishing someone else. But look at this tree. The lightning that struck it has long since dissipated, moved on, forgotten this moment entirely. But the tree carried the burning, held the fire, was consumed by it. When we hold on to aversion, we are like this tree. The original cause of our anger may be long gone, but we continue to burn from the inside. We continue to suffer from the poison we are holding." The traveler looked at the blackened trunk, seeing it now as more than just a dead tree. It was a mirror, reflecting back countless moments of holding anger, nursing grudges, replaying arguments and injustices until they burned grooves of suffering into the mind. How much energy had been consumed in those fires? How much aliveness had been sacrificed to the belief that holding on to anger was somehow protective, or righteous, or necessary? The monk seemed to sense these questions arising. The Buddha taught something very direct about this, he said. Holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. The person you are angry at may never know, may never care, may be completely untouched by your suffering. But you burn and burn and burn. The wind picked up, moving through the clearing, rustling the new growth that surrounded the dead tree. The traveler noticed how the saplings bent with the wind, flexible and alive, while the charred trunk stood rigid and brittle, no longer capable of responding to changing conditions. Another teaching within the teaching. Aversion makes us rigid, makes us hold positions and grievances with such intensity that we lose our flexibility, our ability to meet life as it actually is, rather than as we demand it should be. We become like this burnt tree, dead inside but still standing, no longer participating in the living dance of the forest around us. But aversion is not always as obvious as anger or hatred, the monk continued. It has many subtle forms that are harder to recognize but equally poisonous. There is the irritation at small inconveniences, the impatience when things do not move at the pace we prefer. There is judgment, that constant inner critic that finds fault with ourselves and others, rejecting what is present in favor of some imagined perfection. There is disappointment when expectations are not met, that subtle violence we do to reality by demanding it conform to our preferences. All of these are forms of aversion, ways the mind says no to what is actually here. And each instance, no matter how small, is like adding another stick to the fire that consumes us from within. The traveler felt the weight of this teaching, the recognition of how pervasive aversion had been throughout life. Not just big angers and obvious hatreds, but the constant low-grade irritation at existence for not being different than it was. the traffic that moved too slowly, the weather that was too hot or too cold, the body that aged and hurt and needed care, the other people who were inconsiderate or wrong, or simply different than preferred. The endless list of everything that should be other than it was. And beneath all of it, burning steadily, the fire of aversion consuming peace, consuming presence, consuming the possibility of simply being here without constant judgment and resistance. There is a story from the Zen tradition, the monk said, about a student who asked his teacher how to deal with anger. The teacher replied, "Why are you carrying that?" The student was confused. "Carrying what?" he asked. And the teacher said, "The thing you are angry about happened in the past. It is finished, but you continue to carry it into this moment, letting it burn you over and over. Why not set it down?" The student protested. "But what they did was wrong. They should not have done it." And the teacher simply repeated, "Why are you carrying that? Who is being harmed by your carrying it now?" The teaching stunned the student into silence. His teacher was right. The original harm was over. The continued suffering was self-created, was the result of his own refusal to set down the burning coal he had been carrying. Thunder rumbled in the distance, the promised storm moving closer. The first drops of rain began to fall, light and intermittent, tapping on leaves and earth. The monk stood, ready to return to the monastery before the downpour arrived. But he paused, looking back at the burnt tree one last time. "Notice," he said, "that the forest did not stop because of this destruction." Life continued. New growth emerged. The clearing became even more fertile because of the ash. This is the wisdom we can learn. When we stop holding on to the fire of aversion, when we finally set down the burning coals, space opens for new life. Not because we condone harm or pretend nothing difficult has happened, but because we recognize that holding on to the burning only perpetuates suffering. Letting go is not weakness. It is the supreme strength of one who refuses to be consumed. They walked back through the forest as rain intensified, soaking through robes and hair, washing everything clean. The traveler felt something loosening in the chest, some old hard place beginning to soften under the teaching's persistent rain. There were angers carried for years, resentments held so long they had become part of identity, judgments worn like armor protecting against intimacy with life. And all of it, the monk's teaching suggested, was optional. All of it could be set down. Not overnight, not through force of will, but through patient practice, through seeing clearly again and again how the poison operated, how it burned, how it consumed, until the mind finally grew tired of its own suffering and chose something else, chose the radical act of letting be, chose the cooling waters of acceptance over the endless burning of aversion. Back at the monastery, drenched and shivering, they stood under the eaves of the main hall, watching the storm transform the world. Lightning flashed in the distance. Thunder rolled across the valley. Rain poured down with magnificent indifference, washing away dust, feeding roots, filling cisterns, doing exactly what rain does without concern for preference or opinion. The monk smiled, water dripping from his eyebrows. "Even this storm," he said, "is a teaching. It does not ask permission. It does not apologize for inconvenience. It simply arrives, does what it does, and passes." Can we learn to meet all of life this way? Not with aversion, but with acceptance. Not with resistance, but with wonder. This is the practice. This is the path. And it begins with recognizing that the fire of aversion consumes only the one who holds it, and that we are always free to set it down, to open our hands, to stop burning, to choose peace. The practice of radical acceptance. Meeting what is. Weeks passed in the monastery's steady rhythm, each day offering new opportunities to witness the three poisons at work. The traveller had settled into the routines with growing ease, rising before dawn for sitting meditation, working in silence during the assigned periods, eating meals with full attention, studying the teachings in the evenings. But something had shifted after the teaching about aversion. There was now a felt sense of what to look for, how to recognize the second poison when it arose, and more importantly, what to do when it appeared. The old monk had introduced a simple practice that was beginning to change everything. He called it radical acceptance, though the traveller thought of it as learning to say yes to life. The practice was deceptively simple. Whenever discomfort arose, whether physical, emotional, or mental, the instruction was to notice it clearly and name it softly. Tension is here. Irritation is present. Pain has arrived. Not analyzing it, not trying to fix it, not spinning stories about what it meant or why it should not be there. Simply acknowledging what was actually present in direct experience. Then, breathing with it, creating space around it, allowing it to be exactly as it was without adding the suffering of resistance. The monk had been clear. This was not resignation or passivity. It was a powerful act of meeting reality without the filter of aversion, without the constant judgment that divided experience into acceptable and unacceptable, wanted and unwanted. One morning, during sitting meditation, the practice deepened in a way that surprised the traveller. Back pain had been a constant companion during zazen, that familiar ache between the shoulder blades that usually triggered a cascade of resistance and mental complaint. But on this particular morning, when the pain announced itself as it always did, something different happened. Instead of the usual tightening against it, instead of the story about how long until the bell rang and escape became possible, there was simply the clear acknowledgement. Pain is here. And then, breathing, softening, making space, not trying to make the pain go away, but also not collapsing into it, not letting it fill the entire field of awareness, just allowing it to be one element among many in the vast space of this moment. What happened next felt almost miraculous. The pain did not disappear, but its quality changed completely. It was no longer solid, no longer an enemy to be fought. It became a flickering sensation, sometimes sharp, sometimes dull, sometimes barely there, constantly changing from moment to moment. And around it, so much else was present. The sound of rain on the roof, the scent of incense, the feeling of breath moving in and out, the aliveness of sitting here, aware, present, meeting this moment exactly as it was. Tears came unexpectedly, not from sadness, but from a kind of relief so profound it had no words. This was what acceptance felt like. Not giving up, but giving in to what was actually true. Not fighting reality, but dancing with it. After the meditation period ended, the traveller sought out the old monk and tried to describe what had happened. He listened with that quality of attention that made you feel completely seen, completely heard. Then he smiled. "You have discovered something essential," he said. "Acceptance does not mean we like everything that happens. It means we stop adding suffering to pain by resisting what is already here. The pain in your back is real. But the war against the pain, The story that it should not be there, the fear that it will never end, the judgment that something is wrong with you for experiencing it, all of that is optional. All of that is the poison of aversion. When you simply allowed the pain to be pain, without all the extra layers, you found something unexpected. Freedom within limitation, peace within difficulty. They walked together through the vegetable garden, checking on the progress of plants the traveler had helped seed weeks earlier. Tiny shoots had broken through soil and were reaching toward light, each one a small miracle of persistence and trust. The monk bent to examine a row of radishes, touching the leaves gently. These plants do not resist the limitations of being plants, he said. They do not wish they were trees. They do not complain about the rain or the sun or the insects that visit. They simply grow according to their nature, meeting each condition as it arises, responding appropriately without the overlay of should or should not. This is the wisdom of acceptance, not passive resignation, but active participation in life as it actually is, rather than as we wish it were. Over the following days, the traveler began to apply this practice beyond meditation. When irritation arose at a task that seemed tedious or difficult, instead of indulging the story about how unfair or pointless it was, there came the simple acknowledgement. Irritation is present. And then breathing with it, allowing it, watching how it arose and eventually passed like weather moving through. When loneliness surfaced during the long silences of monastic life, instead of fighting it or distracting from it, the same approach. Loneliness is here, breathing, allowing, meeting it with curiosity rather than aversion. And again, the same discovery. The difficult feeling did not destroy anything when met with acceptance. It simply moved through, leaving space for whatever came next. One afternoon, rain returned with particular intensity, forcing everyone inside for work periods usually done outdoors. The mood in the monastery shifted slightly, a collective restlessness at being confined. The traveler noticed irritation rippling through the community in subtle ways. Faces a bit tighter, movements a bit sharper. The old monk called everyone together in the main hall. He did not speak about the weather or suggest they should feel differently. He simply guided a brief period of sitting, inviting everyone to notice what was present in their experience and to practice acceptance of it. Restlessness is here. Frustration is present. Disappointment about cancelled plans has arrived. No judgment, no story, just clear seeing and allowing. After 20 minutes, when they rose to return to their tasks, the atmosphere had completely transformed. Lightness had returned. The rain was just rain. Being inside was just being inside. Nothing wrong, nothing to resist. That evening, during the evening teaching session, the old monk spoke about the subtlety of aversion and the power of acceptance to transform suffering. He reminded them that this practice was not about becoming emotionless or indifferent. We do not stop having preferences, he said. We do not pretend that pain and pleasure are the same, but we learn to hold our preferences lightly. We learn to say yes to life even when it brings what we would not choose. This is radical because it goes against all our conditioning, all the ways we have been taught to grasp at pleasure and push away pain. But it is also liberating beyond measure because it frees us from the exhausting work of constantly trying to control the uncontrollable. He told a story about two monks walking together who came to a river crossing where a woman stood, unable to cross on her own. One monk picked her up without hesitation, carried her across, set her down, and continued walking. Hours later, the other monk was still agitated. "We are not supposed to touch women," he complained. "You broke your vows. What you did was wrong." The first monk turned to him calmly and said, "I set her down hours ago at the river. Why are you still carrying her?" The teaching landed in deep silence. How much did we all carry long after the moment had passed? How many rivers ago had we picked up burdens that could have been set down immediately through simple acceptance of what was? The traveler sat with this story as the evening deepened into night. So many things carried for so long. Old hurts that could have been acknowledged and released. Disappointments that could have been met with acceptance rather than bitter nursing of grievance. Mistakes that could have been learned from and let go rather than carried as permanent proof of unworthiness. The practice of radical acceptance was offering a way out of this endless carrying. Not through denial, not through pretending nothing difficult had happened, but through the profound act of meeting what was present, allowing it to be, and then letting it move through and away. Not grasping at the pleasant, not pushing away the unpleasant, simply being present with what is, breathing, allowing, trusting the natural intelligence of acceptance. As the monastery settled into sleep that night, the traveler lay on the simple mat in the small room and practiced this acceptance with the body's tiredness, with the mind's continued activity despite the late hour, with the uncertainty about the path ahead. Everything was allowed to be exactly as it was, and in that allowing, a deep peace descended, not because circumstances were perfect, but because the war had ended. The constant fight against reality had been suspended, if only for these moments, and in the absence of that fight, there was space, there was ease, there was the simple miracle of being alive and aware, breathing in darkness, held by the monastery's ancient silence, learning slowly how to say yes to life in all its difficulty and beauty. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to practice. But for now, this moment was enough. This breath was enough. This simple act of allowing was enough. The fog that hides everything, not knowing what is real. Morning arrived wrapped in fog so dense, the world beyond the courtyard walls disappeared completely. The traveler stood by the stone basin after morning meditation, staring into whiteness that seemed solid enough to touch. Sounds were muffled, distances impossible to judge. Other monks moved through their routines like ghosts appearing and vanishing in the thick mist. The mountains that usually dominated the eastern horizon were gone. The forest that pressed close on three sides had been erased. Even the sky overhead was obscured, leaving everything suspended in a grey liminal space where orientation became difficult and certainty impossible. It was disorienting, slightly unsettling, but also strangely beautiful in its complete transformation of the familiar world. The old monk appeared beside the traveller, materializing from the fog as if formed from it. He stood in companionable silence for a long moment, then spoke quietly. "The mountains are still there," he said. "You know this. You have seen them every morning for weeks, but right now you cannot see them. Does their invisibility change their reality? Does the fog create or destroy anything? Or does it simply obscure what is already present?" The traveller considered this carefully. "The mountains have not moved," came the response. "They remain exactly as they were yesterday. Only my ability to see them has changed." The monk nodded with satisfaction. "Yes," he said, "and this is the beginning of understanding the third poison, the deepest poison, the root from which the other two grow. We call it moha, delusion, ignorance, the fog that hides what is real." They walked together along the path that circled the monastery grounds, the world reduced to a small sphere of visibility that moved with them through the white. The monk continued teaching, his voice taking on a particular intensity. The first two poisons, craving and aversion, are painful but relatively easy to recognize once we learn what to look for. We can feel the grasping, feel the pushing away. But this third poison is more subtle, more fundamental, more difficult to see because it operates at the level of basic perception and understanding. It is the fog that makes us believe we are seeing clearly when we are actually seeing through layers of conditioning, assumption, and misunderstanding. It is the confusion about the nature of reality itself. What are the primary delusions? The traveler asked, wanting to understand this more clearly. The monk paused, turning to face the questioner directly. The first delusion, he said, is the belief in a solid, permanent, separate self. We believe there is an I, a me, something solid and unchanging at the center of experience. But when we look closely, when we investigate our direct experience, we cannot find this solid self anywhere. What we find instead is a constantly changing flow of sensations, perceptions, thoughts, feelings, all arising and passing moment by moment. There is awareness, yes, but no separate permanent thing to whom it all happens. This false belief in self is the foundation of all suffering because it creates the illusion of separation, the illusion that happiness can be found by protecting and enhancing this non-existent entity. The traveler felt something vertiginous in this teaching, as if the ground had suddenly become less solid. But surely I exist, came the protest. I am here, walking, talking, experiencing this moment. The monk smiled. Of course experience is happening, he said. But where is the experiencer? Right now, there is seeing, but can you find a seer separate from the seeing? There is hearing, but where is the hearer? There is thinking, but who is the thinker if not just another thought arising in awareness? This is not philosophy. This is direct investigation. Look and see for yourself. When you search for the one you call I, what do you actually find? The traveler looked inward, trying to locate this sense of self, and found only more sensations, more thoughts, more feelings, all flowing and changing. Nothing solid, nothing permanent, only process, only movement. The second delusion, the monk continued, is the belief in permanence. We know intellectually that everything changes, that nothing lasts forever, but we do not live as if this is true. We grasp at experiences trying to make them permanent. We build identities around temporary roles and conditions. We make plans as if the future is guaranteed, as if this body will last indefinitely, as if the people we love will always be here. This forgetting of impermanence is ignorance, and it causes tremendous suffering when change inevitably comes, when what we were clinging to dissolves, when loss reveals what was always true but conveniently ignored. The fog of permanence keeps us from seeing the flowing, temporary nature of all phenomena, keeps us investing in what cannot be kept. They had completed the circuit of the monastery and returned to the courtyard, though the fog had not lifted at all. If anything, it had grown thicker, reducing visibility to only a few feet in any direction. The monk gestured to a bench beneath the eaves of the meditation hall, and they sat together. The third delusion, he said, is the belief in separation. We believe we are isolated beings, separate from each other, separate from nature, separate from the world. But this too is fog obscuring reality. Everything is interconnected, interdependent, arising together in a vast web of causes and conditions. The oxygen you breathe was created by trees and ocean algae. The food you eat required sun, rain, soil, farmers, countless beings contributing to your nourishment. Your very body is made of elements that were once stars, scattered across space, gathered on this planet, incorporated into plants and animals, and eventually into the form you call yourself. Where is the separation? Where do you end and the world begin? This teaching pressed against the edges of everything the traveler had assumed about reality. It was dizzying, disorienting, like the fog itself had entered the mind and dissolved all familiar landmarks. But there was also something liberating in it, something that loosened the tight grip of constant self-concern. If there was no separate, permanent self to protect, then what had all the anxiety been about? If everything was already connected, already whole, then what was there to lack? If change was the only constant, then why cling so desperately to what was already passing? The questions spiraled inward, each one opening into deeper inquiry, deeper uncertainty, deeper letting go of what had seemed so solid just moments before. The Buddha spoke of this as anatta, the monk said, not self. It is perhaps the most radical teaching in all of Buddhism, and the most difficult to truly understand because it goes against every instinct, every social conditioning, every story we have been told about who and what we are. But understanding this is the key that unlocks all other teachings. When we see through the illusion of separate self, craving loses its power because there is no isolated self that lacks anything. Aversion loses its grip because there is no separate self that needs protection. The three poisons arise from and depend upon the fundamental ignorance of believing in solid, permanent, separate selfhood. Dispel the ignorance, and the other poisons lose their foundation. But how does one see this directly? The traveler asked. Not as idea, but as lived reality. The monk was quiet for a long time before answering. Through practice, he finally said. Through meditation that investigates the nature of mind and experience. Through inquiry that looks carefully at what is actually present rather than accepting assumptions. Through living with uncertainty, with not knowing, allowing the fog to be fog, without pretending we can see clearly when we cannot. And most of all, through the gradual wearing away of the habitual patterns that reinforce the sense of separate self. Each time we act with generosity, we weaken the belief in separation. Each time we practice compassion, we recognize our interconnection. Each time we sit in meditation and watch thoughts arise and pass without identifying with them, we loosen the grip of the self-illusion. It is patient work, lifelong work, but it is the most important work there is. The fog began to lift finally as midday approached. First, the courtyard walls became visible, then the roofs of buildings, then the tips of nearby trees, and finally, like a gift returned, the mountains emerged in the east, solid and majestic, exactly where they had always been. The traveler watched this gradual revealing with new eyes. The mountains had not changed. The fog had simply obscured them temporarily. And in the same way, reality had not changed. The delusions of self, permanence, and separation simply obscured what was always true. The practice was learning to see through the fog, to recognize when ignorance was operating, to question every assumption, to hold all beliefs lightly, to remain open to the possibility that reality was far more fluid, more interconnected, more mysterious than the small solid world the mind tried to construct for the sake of feeling safe and in control. As they rose to return to the day's activities, the old monk placed a hand briefly on the traveler's shoulder. You are beginning to see, he said. Not completely, not yet, but the fog is starting to lift. Continue the practice, continue the investigation, and most importantly, continue to question the one you think you are. Question until the questions themselves dissolve, and what remains is simply this, simply awareness, simply the vast open knowing that was never born and will never die, that has no center and no edges, that is not separate from anything and therefore complete just as it is. This is your true nature, hidden by the fog of ignorance, but never actually absent. This is what we are remembering together. This is the path, the third poison, root of all poisons. The days following the fog brought unusual clarity to the mountain air, as if the world had been washed clean and everything stood out in sharp relief. Colors seemed brighter, sounds more distinct, the quality of light almost crystalline in its precision. The traveler moved through this enhanced clarity with growing attention, noticing how the mind constantly constructed stories about experience, how perception was never as simple or direct as it seemed. The teaching about delusion had planted seeds that were now sprouting questions everywhere. What was real? What was merely interpretation? Where did direct experience end and conceptual overlay begin? The inquiry had become alive, urgent, impossible to ignore. One afternoon, the old monk invited the traveler to join him in the teaching pavilion, a small open structure at the edge of the grounds with a view over the valley below. He had brought with him an unusual collection of objects, a wooden wheel, an axle, a seat, several planks, a length of rope. He arranged them on the floor between them, then sat back and regarded the collection thoughtfully. "Tell me," he said, "where is the chariot?" The traveler looked at the scattered parts, confused by the question. "There is no chariot here," came the response. "Just parts. Pieces that could be assembled into a chariot, but not a chariot itself." The monk nodded slowly, his eyes bright with teaching energy. "Exactly," he said. "And now I will show you something that will change how you see everything." He picked up the wheel, held it up for examination. "Is this the chariot?" he asked. "No," the traveler said. "It is a wheel." The monk set it down, picked up the axle. "Is this the chariot?" "No, a piece of wood shaped for a purpose." One by one, the monk held up each component, asking the same question, receiving the same answer. Not the chariot, just a part. Then he gestured to the collection as a whole. "Is this the chariot? All these parts together, but not assembled?" The traveler hesitated, sensing a trap, but not seeing it clearly. "No," came the tentative response. "A chariot is an assembled thing, a functioning whole, not just parts lying separate." "So where is the chariot?" the monk pressed. "When does it come into existence?" The traveler sat with this question, turning it over. "When the parts are assembled in the right configuration, that is when we call it a chariot." "But even then," the monk continued, "is there some essential chariot nature that suddenly appears? Or is chariot simply a name we give to a particular arrangement of parts, a conceptual designation that has no independent existence apart from the components and our agreement to call this configuration by that name?" The traveler felt something shifting, some fundamental assumption about reality beginning to crack. "The chariot is just a concept," came the slow realization. "A useful designation, but not a thing that exists separately from the parts and the pattern of their arrangement. Remove any essential part, and we no longer call it a chariot, even though most of the parts remain. So what we call chariot is actually a temporary pattern, a process, not a solid, independent entity. Now, the monk said with quiet intensity, apply this same analysis to what you call yourself. You say I, me, mine, as if there is some solid, unchanging self that possesses these qualities, that has these experiences. But can you find this self when you look directly? Or do you find only parts, components, processes, temporarily arranged in a pattern you have learned to call by your name? The teaching landed with visceral force. The traveler looked inward, searching for the solid self that had always been assumed to exist. But what was found? A body, constantly changing, every cell replacing itself over time. Sensations arising and passing moment by moment, thoughts appearing from nowhere, dissolving back into silence, emotions flowing like weather, memories, fragments of past experience reconstructed in present moment. Where was the solid, unchanging self in any of this? The Buddha taught about the 5 aggregates, the monk continued, seeing the struggle happening behind the traveler's eyes. Form, the physical body and material world. Sensation, the pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral feelings that arise from contact. Perception, the recognition and labeling of experience. Mental formations, the thoughts, emotions, impulses, and patterns of mind. And consciousness, the awareness in which all of this appears. These 5 categories cover all of experience. Everything you have ever known falls into one of these 5 aggregates, but none of them are self. The body is not self, it changes and eventually dies. Sensations are not self, they come and go constantly. Perception is not self, it can be mistaken or altered. Mental formations are not self, they arise and pass based on conditions. Consciousness is not self, it comes and goes with waking and sleeping, changes based on conditions. So where is the self you believe in so completely? The traveler felt something like vertigo, the ground of identity becoming insubstantial. But this feels terrifying, came the honest response. If there is no self, then what am I? Who is having this experience? Who will I be tomorrow? The monk's face softened with compassion. This fear is natural, he said. The self-illusion is the deepest protection the mind creates against the reality of groundlessness, of constant change, of interdependence. We cling to the belief in a solid, separate self because it seems to offer security, continuity, something to hold on to in the midst of life's ceaseless flow. But this security is false. It is like building a house on fog and believing it will stand forever. The teaching of not-self is not meant to terrify, but to liberate. When you see that there is no separate self that can be threatened, no isolated entity that can be harmed, what is there to fear? But there is still functioning, the monk continued. There is still life being lived, choices being made, this conversation happening. Not self does not mean nothing exists. It means that what exists is process, flow, pattern, relationship, not solid separate things. You are not an isolated self having experiences. You are the experiencing itself, the vast interconnected web of causes and conditions temporarily taking this form, moving through this sequence of patterns we call a life. Understanding this does not diminish you. It reveals that you are far more vast, more connected, more mysterious than the small solid self you thought you were. You are not a separate wave worrying about its existence. You are the entire ocean, momentarily expressing itself in this particular wave form. They sat together as the afternoon light shifted toward evening, the valley below filling with long shadows. The traveler wrestled with the teaching, feeling it dissolve familiar reference points, while simultaneously opening something vast and previously unimaginable. If this was true, if there was no solid separate self, then everything changed. The constant self-concern that colored every moment, the perpetual anxiety about maintaining and enhancing this fictional entity, the comparing and competing and defending that exhausted so much energy, all of it was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what was actually happening. The relief in seeing this, even partially, was immense. And underneath the relief, a kind of groundless peace that had no need to stand on anything solid because it was not separate from the flowing ground itself. This is why ignorance is called the root poison, the monk said. Craving arises because we believe in a separate self that lacks something essential. We reach out, trying to complete what we imagine is incomplete, trying to fill a self that we imagine is empty. Aversion arises because we believe in a separate self that needs protection. We push away anything that threatens this fictional entity, wage war against reality to keep this illusion intact. But when ignorance is dispelled, when we see through the fiction of separate selfhood, the foundation of craving and aversion collapses. Not because we force them to stop, but because the misunderstanding that created them has been corrected. This is why insight into not self is considered the highest teaching, the key that unlocks all other doors. As twilight descended and they prepared to return to the monastery for evening meditation, the monk gathered the chariot parts back into their basket. He paused before standing, looking directly at the traveler. You will not understand this completely today, or tomorrow, or even next year, he said. This is the deepest teaching, the one that takes a lifetime to fully integrate. But you have begun to see. You have looked for the self and not found it. This is the beginning of wisdom. Continue to investigate. Continue to question every assumption about who and what you are, and most of all, learn to rest in the not knowing, in the groundlessness, in the vast open awareness that is your true nature. This is the practice. This is the path. This is how we dispel the fog of ignorance and discover what was always true but hidden by our desperate need for solid ground. They walked back through the gathering darkness, the first stars appearing overhead in a sky that seemed suddenly more vast, more alive, more intimate than ever before. The traveler felt shaken and expanded simultaneously, as if the edges of identity had become permeable, as if what had seemed so solid was revealing itself as space, as openness, as the luminous emptiness in which all form arose and dissolved. It was not comfortable, but it was true in a way that went beyond comfort or discomfort, beyond preference or aversion. It simply was, and in that simple isness, something profound was being remembered, not learned for the first time, but recognized as what had always been present, waiting patiently beneath the fog of ignorance for the moment of clear seeing to arrive. That moment had arrived, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. The web of causes and conditions. Nothing stands alone. Morning brought another profound teaching that built on the previous day's revelation about not self. After the early sitting meditation, the community gathered for breakfast in the dining hall. The traveler took a place on a cushion and received a bowl of steamed rice and vegetables, the simple meal that had sustained countless practitioners over countless years. But today, before anyone began eating, the old monk raised his hand for attention. This morning, he said, we will practice deep looking before we eat. We will use our meal as a doorway to understanding the third aspect of delusion, the belief in separation. Please, hold your bowl and look deeply into it. What do you see? The traveler looked down at the rice, white and steaming, grains distinct, yet forming a cohesive whole. "It is rice," came the obvious answer, spoken silently in the mind. But the monk had taught that obvious answers were usually the shallowest layer of truth. Looking more deeply now, what else was visible in this bowl? The traveler began to follow threads backward, seeing past the rice to the field where it grew. The farmer who planted the seeds, the sun that provided energy for growth, the rain that watered the crop, the soil that held nutrients gathered over millennia, the insects and microorganisms that enriched that soil, the hands that harvested the grain, the people who processed, transported, sold it, the monk who cooked it this morning. Each thread led to countless other threads, spreading outward in an infinitely complex web. "Look even more deeply," the monk's voice guided from the front of the hall. "See the farmer's parents, without whom he would not exist to grow this rice. See the sun and the vast processes of nuclear fusion that allow it to shine. See the formation of this planet billions of years ago, the gathering of matter from the death of previous stars. See the evolution of rice as a species over millions of years. See the cultural transmission of knowledge about cultivation and cooking. See the economic systems that made this exchange possible. See the peace that allows us to sit here safely while others have labored to bring us this nourishment. How many causes and conditions had to come together for this single bowl of rice to be here now? Millions, billions, infinite." The hall remained silent, each person engaged in this practice of deep looking, following the threads of interconnection as far as awareness could reach. The traveler felt something vast opening in consciousness, a recognition that went beyond intellectual understanding. This rice was not a separate thing. It was the entire universe expressing itself in this particular form. Sun and rain and soil and human effort and evolution and stellar death and everything, absolutely everything, gathered into this bowl. And if the rice contained the entire universe, then so did everything else. So did the body sitting here. So did each breath. So did this moment of awareness itself. Nothing stood alone. Nothing existed in isolation. Everything was intimately connected to everything else in a web of relationships so complex and beautiful, it defied comprehension. "Now," the monk said softly, "see yourself in the rice. Your body is made from previous meals like this one. The rice you ate yesterday became your flesh, your blood, your bone. The vegetables became your cells. Where do you end and the rice begin? When does rice stop being rice and become you? The boundary you believe separates you from the world is revealed as conceptual, not actual. You are not a separate thing in a world of other separate things. You are a process, a pattern, a temporary formation of the same elements that form everything else. You are the universe knowing itself through this particular configuration of matter and awareness. This is not poetry. This is precise seeing into the nature of reality. The teaching continued as they finally began to eat, each bite now heavy with meaning, with recognition, with gratitude. The Buddha called this pratityasamutpada, the monk explained between bites. In English, you might say dependent origination, or interdependent co-arising. It points to the truth that nothing comes into existence on its own. Everything arises dependent on conditions, and those conditions themselves arose dependent on previous conditions, in an endless web of causation with no beginning and no end. When we see this clearly, the delusion of separation cannot survive. How can you be separate from the rice that becomes your body, from the air that becomes your breath, from the words that shape your thoughts, from the people whose labor supports your life? Separation is revealed as another layer of fog, another aspect of the fundamental ignorance that creates suffering. After the meal, the traveler walked alone in the garden, still feeling the reverberations of the teaching. Everything looked different now, alive with connections, humming with relationship. The vegetables growing in neat rows were not separate from the soil, the sun, the seeds they came from, the future meals they would become. The stones lining the path were not separate from the mountains they came from, the hands that placed them here, the feet that had worn them smooth over decades. The breath moving in and out was not separate from the trees producing oxygen, the atmosphere holding it, the cells using it to create energy. The sense of being a separate, isolated self continued to dissolve, not into nothingness, but into everything, into the vast interconnected web in which nothing stood alone and everything belonged completely. Thich Nhat Hanh teaches, the old monk said, appearing beside the traveler as he often did, about interbeing. He created this word to capture what dependent origination points toward. To interbe is to exist only in relationship, only in connection with everything else. When you look at a sheet of paper, you can see the tree it came from, the rain that watered that tree, the logger who cut it, the mill that processed it, everything. The paper is made entirely of non-paper elements. It is empty of separate self-existence, but full of the entire universe. This is true of everything, including what you call yourself. You are made entirely of non-you elements. Your parents, your food, your culture, your language, your experiences, all of it not you, but necessary for this configuration you call self to exist. They paused by a small pond at the garden's edge where koi fish moved lazily through clear water. "Watch the fish," the monk said. Is it separate from the water it swims in? Can it exist apart from that water? Does the water exist unchanged by the presence of the fish? They create each other, define each other, exist only in relationship to each other. This is the truth of all existence. Nothing independent, nothing isolated, only the vast web of interbeing in which everything participates, everything contributes, everything is necessary. When you see this, really see it, not just think about it. Compassion arises naturally. How can you harm anything when you recognize that it is not separate from you? How can you act without considering consequences when you see that all actions ripple through the web, affecting everything? The traveler felt tears rising, not from sadness, but from a kind of overwhelming recognition. This was why the monastery emphasized service, generosity, care for the community and the land. Not as moral obligation imposed from outside, but as natural expression of seeing truly. When separation was revealed as illusion, when the web of interbeing became visible, acting for the benefit of the whole was not sacrifice, but intelligence. It was recognizing that there was no self to sacrifice, no other to help, only the web caring for itself through these temporary patterns of individuation. The tears fell silently, watering the ground, returning to the cycle, part of the endless exchange between inner and outer that the belief in separation had always obscured. "Consider a bowl of rice that will be eaten tomorrow," the monk said, his teaching taking on an almost poetic quality. Right now, that rice is still in the storage room, perhaps. It contains the possibility of nourishing a body, but that has not happened yet. After it is cooked and eaten, where is the rice? It has become energy, cells, thought, movement. It continues as compost, as carbon dioxide from breath, as heat radiating from skin. It never stops being part of the web, but the form changes constantly. This is also true of what you call self. Before birth, where were you? In the genetic material of parents, in the conditions that brought them together, in the long evolutionary history that created human bodies capable of consciousness. After death, where will you be? In the memories of those who knew you, in the consequences of your actions rippling forward, in the physical elements returning to Earth to nourish new life. You are never separate enough to be born or die. You are a wave that never leaves the ocean. They returned to the monastery as clouds gathered overhead, promising afternoon rain. The traveler moved in silence, no longer certain where self ended and world began, no longer invested in maintaining that fictional boundary. The practice had been about letting go, about releasing the tight grip on separate identity. But now it was becoming clear that there had never been anything to let go of. The separate self was a story, a useful fiction for navigating social reality, but not an accurate description of what was actually happening. What was actually happening was this vast, interconnected unfolding, this web of causes and conditions temporarily taking form as a human life, as a monastery, as a practice, as a moment of rain beginning to fall on ancient stones worn smooth by water and time, and the patient presence of those who had walked this path before and would walk it after. All of us waves in the same ocean, never separate, never lost, always held in the infinite web of interbeing. As rain intensified, everyone gathered under the covered walkways, watching water transform the world again. The old monk stood with his face tilted up, catching drops on his skin, smiling with a joy that seemed to have no cause beyond simple presence. "This too is teaching," he said, to no one in particular. "Rain does not fall on you. Rain and you arise together as part of the same weather, the same system, the same dance of water and consciousness, and the earth dreaming itself into being. When you see this, how can you ever feel alone? How can you ever believe the delusion of separation? You are everyone and everything, temporarily experiencing itself through this particular perspective. Rest in that. Let the ignorance dispel. Let the fog of isolation lift. Welcome yourself home to the vast web where you have always belonged, where you could never not belong, where your very existence is proof of the infinite relationships that make all existence possible. This is the truth ignorance hides. This is what we are remembering together, when ignorance feeds the other poisons. Seeing the connection. The morning work period found the traveler back in the vegetable garden, hands deep in soil, pulling weeds and aerating the earth around young plants. The physical labor had become a kind of meditation, each movement an opportunity to notice the patterns of mind, the arising and passing of thoughts and sensations. But today, something shifted. While loosening soil around a tomato plant, watching roots emerge from the dark earth, white and delicate and reaching, a sudden insight arrived with the force of direct seeing. I want these tomatoes to grow well because I believe I am separate and need them for sustenance. The wanting, the investment in outcome, was rooted entirely in the delusion of being an isolated self that could lack something essential. The recognition spread like ripples in water. Every instance of craving could be traced back to this fundamental ignorance. Wanting praise because the separate self needed validation. Wanting comfort because the separate self felt threatened by discomfort. Wanting pleasure because the separate self believed happiness existed in experiences rather than in its own nature. And underneath all of it, the basic confusion about what was actually happening. The belief that there was a solid, separate, permanent self that needed protecting, enhancing, satisfying. Without that belief, what was there to crave? Without the illusion of isolation and lack, where did wanting find its purchase? The insight was dizzying in its simplicity and its implications. The old monk was working nearby, tending to bean plants that climbed wooden trellises. He seemed to sense the shift in the traveler's energy and came over, wiping hands on his work robe. "Something has been seen," he said. It was not a question. The traveler looked up from the soil, eyes bright with recognition. "The craving only exists because of the delusion," came the words, tumbling out with excitement. "If there is no separate self, then there is nothing that lacks anything. The wanting is built on a false foundation." The monk nodded slowly, his weathered face creasing with satisfaction. "Yes," he said simply. "You are beginning to see how the three poisons interweave, how ignorance is the root from which the others grow. Tell me more about what you are seeing." The traveler sat back on heels, looking at hands covered in dark earth. All these weeks, the teaching has been about recognizing craving and aversion, learning to work with them, to accept them, to let them move through without being controlled by them. And that has been valuable, essential even. But this is different. This is seeing that they only have power because of the underlying delusion. It is like the three are connected, like branches growing from the same root. Ignorance creates the belief in a separate self. That belief creates the feeling of being incomplete, isolated, vulnerable. And from that feeling comes the grasping at what might complete us and the pushing away of what might threaten us. The whole structure of suffering is built on this one fundamental misunderstanding about what we are. The monk gestured for them to sit together on a low stone wall at the garden's edge. "This is a crucial insight," he said. "Many people practice with craving and aversion for years without seeing this deeper connection. They work on being less greedy, less angry, more accepting, and this brings some relief. But it is like trimming the branches while leaving the root intact. The patterns keep growing back because the fundamental confusion remains. When you see clearly that there is no separate self to protect or enhance, the compulsion behind craving and aversion loses much of its force. Not immediately, not completely, because the habits run deep. But the seeing changes everything, because you are no longer fighting symptoms. You are addressing the actual cause. A breeze moved through the garden, rustling leaves, carrying the scent of herbs warming in morning sun. The traveler breathed deeply, feeling into this new understanding, testing its solidity. But the mind has believed in this separate self for so long, came the question. How does one uproot such a deeply established delusion? The monk smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening with compassion. "Through the same practices we have been engaging," he said, "but now with this understanding informing them. Meditation investigates the nature of self directly, looking again and again for this solid entity and finding only process, only flow. Mindfulness catches the moments when the self-story arises and sees it as story rather than truth. Study and contemplation of teachings like not self and dependent origination provide the conceptual framework. And most importantly, ethical action based on interconnection gradually weakens the habit of self-centered thinking and behaving." The monk picked up a small stone from the ground, turned it over in his palm. "Consider this rock," he said. "Solid, separate, enduring. Or so it seems. But look more deeply. It is made of minerals that were once part of mountains, broken down by weather over millennia. Those mountains were formed from the cooling of molten material billions of years ago. That material came from the explosion of stars even earlier. This rock contains the entire history of the universe. It is not separate from anything, and even now it is slowly breaking down, releasing particles that will become soil, will nourish plants, will eventually become part of animal bodies, will continue the endless transformation. Nothing is truly solid. Nothing is truly separate. The rock seems solid only because we are not paying close enough attention, because the time scale of its change is longer than our lifetime of observation. This is also true of the self, the monk continued. It seems solid because we are not looking closely enough. It seems continuous because we are not noticing the constant arising and passing of mental and physical phenomena. When you were a child, was there the same self as now? The body is completely different. The thoughts are different. The memories are different. The sense of identity is different. So where is the continuity? Where is the solid, unchanging self? There is none. There is only the habit of linking moments together with the word I and believing that word refers to something permanent. This habit is ignorance, and from this ignorance grows all the suffering of craving and aversion, because the fictional self seems to need protecting, seems to lack something, seems to require constant maintenance and defense. They sat in silence for a time, watching ants carry tiny burdens across the stone wall, following paths worn by countless generations of ants before them, each one playing its role in the colony's collective life without any apparent sense of separate self-importance. The traveler thought about the previous night's teaching on interbeing, how everything existed only in relationship. If that was true, and it increasingly felt true, then the separate self was truly impossible. The very concept was contradictory. To be separate was to exist independently, but nothing existed independently. Everything arose from conditions and would dissolve when conditions changed. The body, the mind, the sense of self, all of it was conditioned, temporary, empty of inherent existence. And yet here was life, happening, aware, vibrant, not diminished by this emptiness, but somehow made more vast, more precious, more miraculous by it. There is a story, the monk said, about a student who came to a Zen master complaining about his difficulties. I am beset by anger, lust, greed, the student said. How do I overcome these demons? The master looked at him carefully and said, Bring me these demons and I will help you overcome them. The student was confused. I cannot bring them, he said. They are inside me. They are part of my mind. The master smiled. If they are inside you, if they are part of your mind, then where are you that contains them? Are you the container or the contents? Are you the one who has thoughts, or are you the thoughts themselves? Who is this self that is beset by mental states? Look closely, and you will find that the demons and the one complaining about the demons are both just thoughts arising in awareness, neither more solid than the other, both empty of inherent existence. The traveler felt the teaching land in that place beyond words, where real transformation happened. The one who wanted liberation from suffering was itself part of the pattern of suffering. The one who sought to overcome the three poisons was itself a manifestation of the third poison, the delusion of separate selfhood. It was not about a self becoming enlightened. It was about seeing through the illusion of self, and in that seeing, discovering what had always been true but obscured by ignorance. Not nothing, but no thing. Not absence, but presence without center. Not emptiness as void, but emptiness as infinite potential. as the open awareness in which all experience arose and dissolved without anything being stained or diminished. As they returned to work, hands again entering soil, the practice took on new meaning. The weeds being pulled were not just plants in the wrong place. They were metaphors for the patterns of craving and aversion that arose from the root delusion of separate selfhood. But the real work was not fighting the weeds endlessly. The real work was understanding the conditions that allowed them to grow, addressing those conditions at their source. And the source was always ignorance, the fog that obscured clear seeing, the confusion about what was real and what was merely habit, story, conditioned response. As the morning progressed toward afternoon, the traveler worked with growing clarity, each movement informed by the understanding that was slowly, patiently, inevitably dispelling the darkness of not knowing with the light of direct seeing. The path was revealing itself, not as something to be traveled by a separate self, but as the very ground of being, always present, always available, waiting only for the fog to lift and the truth to be recognized. The middle way, between extremes. That evening, after the simple meal and the cleaning of bowls, the community gathered for a special teaching. The old monk had announced that he would tell the story of the Buddha's awakening, a story the traveler had heard before, but never with full attention, never with the foundation of understanding that had been built over these weeks of practice. The meditation hall was lit with oil lamps that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Everyone settled onto cushions with the quality of attention reserved for teachings that carried particular weight. The old monk sat at the front, his posture upright but relaxed, his face calm in the flickering light. He began to speak, his voice taking on the quality of one who had told this story many times, but never tired of its essential truth. Before he was called the Buddha, before he awakened to the true nature of reality, he was a man named Siddhartha, born into privilege and protection. His father, a king, tried to shield him from all knowledge of suffering, surrounding him with pleasure and beauty and comfort. Siddhartha lived in palaces, enjoyed every luxury, wanted for nothing that the world of the senses could provide. But this life of indulgence did not bring lasting peace. Something felt incomplete. Something felt false about a life that denied the reality of aging, sickness, and death that existed beyond the palace walls. So one day, Siddhartha left everything behind. He abandoned his life of luxury and became a wandering ascetic, seeking truth through extreme self-denial. For 6 years, the monk continued. Siddhartha practiced austerities that pushed the body to its absolute limits. He ate almost nothing, reducing his diet to a single grain of rice per day. He stood for hours in scorching sun. He slept on beds of thorns. He held his breath until consciousness nearly left him. He pushed away every comfort, every pleasure, every ease, believing that liberation lay in complete rejection of the physical world and its desires. His body became skeletal, his strength nearly gone. Other ascetics revered him as a model of spiritual dedication. But still, awakening did not come. Still, the fundamental questions remained unanswered. The extreme of self-denial proved as unsatisfying as the extreme of self-indulgence had been. One day, weak from years of fasting, Siddhartha collapsed by a river. A young woman named Sujata found him there and offered him a bowl of rice milk. In his depleted state, barely able to sit upright, Siddhartha had to make a choice: continue the path of extreme asceticism and possibly die, or accept the offering and acknowledge that this approach was not leading to truth. He drank the rice milk. He allowed nourishment to return to his wasted body. And in that moment of acceptance, of turning away from the extreme, He remembered something from his youth. He remembered sitting under a rose apple tree, watching his breath, feeling a natural state of calm and clarity arise without force, without strain. That memory pointed toward another way, a path between the extremes of indulgence and denial. The old monk paused, letting the story settle into the listening silence. Siddhartha recalled a teaching his music teacher had given him years earlier about tuning the strings of a sitar. If the strings are too loose, they produce no sound. If they are too tight, they break. Only when they are tuned just right, not too tight and not too loose, can beautiful music emerge. This became the principle that guided his next steps. Not grasping at pleasure, but not punishing the body either. Not indulging craving, but not waging war against all desire. The middle way between extremes, the path of balance, of wisdom, of understanding, that liberation does not come from either extreme, but from seeing clearly the nature of reality itself. That very night, sitting under what would later be called the Bodhi tree, Siddhartha entered deep meditation with this new understanding. He would not move from that spot until he either awakened or died in the attempt. But this time, his effort was balanced. He was not forcing or straining, but neither was he passive or dull. He applied clear attention to the arising and passing of all phenomena, watching craving arise and fade, watching aversion arise and fade, watching the mind construct the sense of self moment by moment and seeing that construction as process rather than truth. Through the night he sat, penetrating deeper and deeper into the nature of existence, until finally, as morning star appeared in the eastern sky, the final veils of ignorance fell away. He saw completely and directly the three characteristics of all existence: impermanence, suffering, and not self. In that seeing, all grasping ceased, all resistance ended. What remained was vast, clear, free, at peace. The traveler listened with tears streaming silently down both cheeks, understanding the story now in a way that had not been possible before experiencing the three poisons directly, before wrestling with craving and aversion, before beginning to see through the delusion of separate selfhood. The Buddha's path was not unique. It was the path every human being had to walk in their own way, through their own experience. The details differed, but the essential journey was the same. Moving through the extremes, learning from each, discovering that truth lay not in either pole, but in the balanced middle, in the clear, seeing that required neither grasping nor rejecting, but only steadfast attention to what was actually true. The middle way applies not just to physical comfort and asceticism, the old monk said, continuing the teaching. It applies to how we work with the three poisons. Some people try to indulge every craving, believing that satisfaction lies in getting everything they want. This is the extreme of indulgence, and it leads to exhaustion, dependency, and ultimately greater suffering as the wanting never ends. Others try to crush every desire, to eliminate all preference, to become stone, like in their non-reactivity. This is the extreme of suppression, and it leads to rigidity, denial, and a subtle violence toward one's own humanity. The middle way acknowledges craving when it arises, but does not feed it or obey it. It sees the craving clearly, understands its source in delusion, and allows it to move through without being controlled by it. The same principle applies to aversion, the monk continued. Some people express every anger, every irritation, believing that holding it in is unhealthy. They act out their aversion constantly, spreading suffering to everyone around them. Others try to never feel anger, to suppress it completely, to present a false face of perpetual calm while burning inside. Both extremes create suffering. The middle way acknowledges aversion when it arises, investigates its roots, understands the suffering it creates, and responds with wisdom rather than being driven by the reactive force of hatred. It is neither indulgence nor suppression, but clear seeing and wise response. This requires practice, requires patience, requires the willingness to work with the mind as it is, rather than demanding it be something it is not yet ready to be. And with ignorance, the monk said, the middle way means not pretending to understand what we do not yet see clearly, but also not remaining passive in confusion, simply accepting delusion as inevitable. We investigate, we study, we contemplate, we test teachings against direct experience. We remain open to having our understanding corrected and deepened. We hold beliefs lightly, knowing that reality is more vast and mysterious than any concept can capture. This is the balance between blind belief and cynical rejection, between rigid dogma and directionless relativism. The middle way trusts the possibility of clear seeing while remaining humble about the limitations of current understanding. It is the path of genuine inquiry, genuine practice, genuine transformation. As the teaching concluded and the community prepared for evening meditation, the traveler sat with this understanding of the middle way, feeling how it applied to every aspect of practice and life. Not too tight, not too loose, not forcing, not passive, not indulging, not suppressing, not grasping at awakening, not resigning to suffering. The path was indeed narrow, requiring constant attention, constant adjustment, constant return to balance when extremes pulled one way or another. But it was also natural, aligned with the way things actually worked, sustainable in a way that extremes never could be. The Buddha had discovered this through his own painful exploration of both poles. And now, 25 centuries later, practitioners were still learning the same essential lesson, still finding their way between extremes, still discovering that freedom lay not in perfect control or total abandon, but in the balanced middle where clear seeing became possible. The meditation that followed felt different, informed by the evening's teaching, sitting upright but not rigid, breathing naturally without controlling or forcing, allowing thoughts to arise and pass without indulging their stories or suppressing their appearance, meeting sensations with interest rather than craving the pleasant or rejecting the unpleasant, resting in awareness that was neither too tight with concentration nor too loose with dullness. The middle way revealing itself not as abstract concept, but as lived experience, as the felt sense of being in right relationship with this moment, with this breath, with this precious temporary human life that was offering itself as the vehicle for awakening. The bell rang softly after the hour concluded. Everyone bowed. The day ended as it had begun, held in the vast patience of practice, the ancient way that led beyond suffering not through extremes, but through the balanced middle path that the Buddha had walked, had taught, and that remained as relevant and necessary now as it had ever been. Antidote to greed, generosity and contentment. The next phase of the traveler's training began with a teaching that felt both simple and impossibly difficult. The old monk explained that understanding the three poisons intellectually was valuable, but true transformation required cultivating their opposites, their antidotes. For craving, the antidote was twofold: generosity, which directly countered the grasping movement of greed, and contentment, which addressed the underlying feeling of lack that fueled wanting. These were not just nice qualities to develop. They were essential practices that gradually rewired the deep patterns of mind, replacing the habit of grasping with the capacity to open, to share, to recognize sufficiency. The teaching made sense, but could it really change patterns that had been carved deep over decades? The first practice began that very day. Each person in the monastery was asked to choose something they valued, something they used regularly or had attachment to, and offer it to someone who needed it more. Not something useless or unwanted, but something that triggered a small contraction when imagined giving it away. The traveler thought immediately of a favorite ceramic bowl, simple but beautiful, with a blue glaze that seemed to capture sky and water. It had been a gift years ago, carried to the monastery as one of the few personal possessions allowed. Using it for meals had become a small ritual, a connection to life before this practice, a comfort object in the midst of transformation. The thought of giving it away created immediate resistance, which meant, of course, that it was the perfect choice. A visiting monk had arrived the previous day, traveling on foot between monasteries with almost nothing, his few possessions worn and weathered by the road. The traveler approached him after morning meditation, holding the bowl wrapped in cloth. The visitor's eyes widened with surprise when he saw what was being offered. "Are you certain?" he asked. "This is a beautiful piece, clearly cherished." The traveler felt the tightness in the chest, the mind already beginning its protest, already creating stories about regret and need, and the special quality of this particular bowl. But underneath the resistance was also curiosity. What would happen if this was released? What would be discovered on the other side of the grasping? "Yes," came the answer. "Please take it. It should travel with you." The moment of actual releasing, of placing the bowl in the visitor's hands and stepping back, was extraordinary. The expected feeling of loss did not arrive. Instead, there was a sudden expansion in the chest, as if a tight band had been cut and breath could move freely for the first time in hours. Joy arose, completely unexpected, as the visitor's face lit with genuine gratitude. "Thank you," he said. "I will use it well and remember your generosity." And in that moment, something became crystalline clear. The bowl had been creating suffering through the subtle grasping attached to it. In giving it away, in opening the hand that had been closed around it, freedom arrived. Not loss, liberation. The teaching was not abstract anymore. It was visceral, undeniable, transformative. The old monk found the traveler later that morning, sitting quietly in the garden, and settled beside him without speaking. After a time, he said softly, "You look different, lighter." The traveler nodded, still processing the experience. "I gave away my bowl," came the explanation, "and something happened. It felt like the opposite of what the mind predicted. I thought I would feel loss, regret, impoverished, but instead there was joy, relief, like setting down a weight I did not know I was carrying." The monk smiled with deep satisfaction. "This is dana," he said, "generosity." It is one of the most powerful practices for transforming craving, because it works directly with the movement of grasping. Every time we give, every time we open our hand instead of closing it, we train the mind in non-attachment. We prove to ourselves that we can release what we thought we needed, and not only survive, but actually feel more free. The Buddha placed generosity as the foundation of the path. The monk continued. Before ethical conduct, before meditation, before wisdom, he taught giving. Why? Because generosity begins to loosen the tight knot of self-concern that makes all other practices difficult. When we give without expectation of return, without needing recognition or reward, we are practicing not self in the most direct way. We are acting as if we are not separate, as if the boundary between self and other is permeable, as if the well-being of others is our own well-being. This is not sacrifice. This is intelligence. This is recognizing the truth of interconnection and acting from that recognition. Every act of genuine generosity weakens the delusion of isolation and strengthens the understanding of interbeing. Over the following days, the traveler looked for opportunities to practice this teaching, offering to take on extra work so others could rest, sharing food when portions were distributed, giving time and attention to a newer arrival who was struggling with the demands of monastic life. Each act of giving created the same surprising result, not depletion, but enrichment, not loss, but gain. The logic seemed backwards, contradicting everything the culture of accumulation had taught. But the experience was undeniable. Opening the hand felt better than closing it. Sharing created connection rather than scarcity. Generosity generated joy that receiving never quite matched. The antidote was working, slowly dissolving the patterns of grasping, making space for a different way of being. But generosity alone was not enough, the monk explained during an evening teaching. If we give everything away but still feel internally impoverished, still believe we lack something essential, the craving will return in new forms. So we must also cultivate santosha, contentment. This means learning to recognize and appreciate the sufficiency of what is already here. Not as positive thinking or denial of genuine needs, but as a clear seeing that most of our wanting is not about actual necessity, but about the mind's habit of reaching past this moment towards some imagined future where finally we will have enough. The practice of contentment is the practice of pausing, breathing, looking around and within, and acknowledging the extraordinary gift of simply being alive right now. That night, before sleep, the traveler practiced what the monk had taught. Lying on the simple mat in the small room, instead of the usual mental review of the day or planning for tomorrow, there was only attention to what was actually present. A roof overhead, keeping rain out, walls providing shelter, enough food in the belly to sleep without hunger, breath moving effortlessly without conscious control, a body that, despite its aches and limitations, was functioning, supporting practice, allowing engagement with life. The teachings that were slowly transforming understanding and freeing the heart from old patterns. The community holding space for this work. The old monk offering guidance with infinite patience. When the mind stopped its habitual reaching and simply acknowledged what was here, the feeling was overwhelming. Not lack, abundance, not poverty, overwhelming richness. Tears came again, but different from previous tears. These were tears of gratitude, of recognition that everything necessary was already present, had always been present, but had been invisible behind the constant wanting, the perpetual dissatisfaction, the belief that happiness existed somewhere other than right here. Thich Nhat Hanh's teaching echoed in memory. We already have enough conditions to be happy, not when we get the next thing, not when circumstances improve, not in some imagined future. Now, this breath, this moment. This unrepeatable intersection of conditions that would never occur again in exactly this way. How had this been missed for so long? How had the mind's restless reaching obscured the simple sufficiency of what was? The practice of contentment deepened over the following weeks, taking time during routine activities to pause and acknowledge the gift of functioning eyes that could see morning light on stone walls, ears that could hear birdsong and rain and the bell calling to meditation, hands that could work, feel texture, express care through action, the capacity to learn, to change, to gradually free the heart from the prison of its own conditioning. Each pause, each moment of recognition was like adding a drop of water to a vessel. Slowly, imperceptibly, the vessel of contentment filled. And as it filled, the urgency of craving diminished. Not because desires stopped arising, but because they no longer carried the same weight, the same sense that fulfilling them was necessary for well-being. They became like clouds passing through sky, noticed but not believed, present but not defining. One morning, weeks into this practice, the traveler woke before the bell and lay quietly watching dawn light gradually illuminate the room. There was nowhere else to be, nothing that needed to be different, no wanting pulling attention towards some other moment. Just this, just the profound simplicity of being here, breathing, aware, held by something vast that had no name but felt like coming home. The first poison, craving, had not been destroyed or eliminated. It still arose sometimes, still whispered its familiar promises about happiness being one more thing away. But it no longer ruled. The antidotes of generosity and contentment had created space around it, had revealed it as optional rather than mandatory, had proven again and again that opening was better than grasping, that sufficiency was a perspective available in any moment rather than a condition requiring specific circumstances. The path was working, the transformation was real, and the journey continued, one breath, one moment of practice, one small opening at a time. Antidote to aversion, compassion, and acceptance. If generosity countered craving, what countered aversion? The old monk posed this question during a teaching session as rain drummed steadily on the roof, creating a rhythmic backdrop to the inquiry. The traveler thought back to the night vigil, to the practice of allowing pain without resistance, to watching the monk remain still as the wasp explored his arm. Acceptance had already been introduced as essential practice. But the monk indicated there was another layer, another practice equally important. The antidote to aversion is metta, he said, loving kindness, compassion, the cultivation of a heart that wishes well-being for all beings, including oneself, including even those who have caused harm. This might sound soft or sentimental, but it is actually fierce practice that directly confronts the hardness of hatred, the contraction of irritation, the subtle violence of constant judgment. That very afternoon, the traveler faced an unexpected test of this teaching. A monk who had been at the monastery far longer than the traveler, a man with a sharp tongue and exacting standards, began criticizing the way morning tasks were being completed. The sweeping was not thorough enough. The vegetables were being washed incorrectly. The meditation posture was sloppy. Each criticism landed like a small dart, triggering familiar patterns of defensiveness and hurt. Old wounds from childhood opened, memories of never being good enough, of constant correction, of conditional love that had to be earned through perfect performance. Within minutes, strong aversion arose, anger at this critical monk, resentment at being treated this way, the desire to defend, to attack back, to create distance and protection through walls of hostility. But the training held. Instead of reacting immediately, instead of allowing the aversion to drive words and actions, there was a pause, a breath, a remembering of the teachings. This is the second poison, arising exactly as it has been taught. What is the antidote? The traveler excused himself and went to sit in the meditation hall, needing space to work with what was arising. The anger was present, hot and demanding. The hurt underneath it was raw and vulnerable. And beneath that, something the monk had pointed to in previous teachings: fear. The aversion was protecting against the fear of being inadequate, of not belonging, of being rejected. All of it rooted in the delusion of a separate self that needed protecting. All of it burning like the charred tree struck by lightning, consuming from within. The old monk appeared, as he often did when struggle was present. He sat beside the traveler without asking what was wrong, simply offering steady presence. After a time, he spoke quietly. "Someone has triggered aversion in you." The traveler nodded, not trusting voice yet. The monk continued, "This is painful, but it is also an opportunity. You can continue holding the hot coal of anger, letting it burn you, or you can begin practicing the antidote. Would you like to try?" "Yes," came the whispered response. "Anything to ease this burning." The monk guided what came next. "Close your eyes," he said. "Bring to mind the person you are angry with. See his face. Feel the anger. Do not suppress it, but also do not feed it with more thoughts. Just acknowledge it is here." The traveler did as instructed, bringing the critical monk to mind, feeling the anger surge again. "Now," the old monk said, "remember that this person also suffers. He is also caught in the three poisons, also struggling with his own pain, his own fear, his own conditioning. His harshness comes from his own wounds, not from your inadequacy. Can you see his suffering? Can you recognize that he, like you, wants to be happy but does not know how to find lasting peace?" The traveler tried to shift perspective, to see the critical monk not as enemy but as fellow sufferer. It was difficult. The anger resisted this reframing, but gradually, with patient attention, something softened. Yes. Beneath the harsh words was probably pain. Beneath the criticism was probably his own fear of not being enough, his own attempt to create order and control in a chaotic world. "Good," the monk said softly. "Now, speak these words silently, directing them toward him. May you be free from suffering. May you find peace. May you be happy." The resistance was immediate and strong. The mind protested. "Why should I wish him well? He hurt me. He was unkind. He does not deserve kindness." But the monk's voice was firm. "This practice is not for him. It is for you. You are the one burning with anger. You are the one suffering from aversion. These words are medicine for your own heart. They do not condone harmful behavior. They simply refuse to meet harm with more harm. They choose to open rather than close, to soften rather than harden. Now try. May you be free from suffering. May you find peace. May you be happy." The traveler repeated the phrases, at first mechanically, the words feeling hollow and insincere. But the monk encouraged continuation, again and again, directing loving kindness toward the one who had triggered such pain. "May you be free from suffering. May you find peace. May you be happy." And slowly, imperceptibly at first, something began to shift. The anger was still present, but it was no longer the only thing present. Space opened around it. The heart, which had contracted into a tight defensive ball, began to soften and expand. Tears came, releasing something that had been held tight. The critical monk was still difficult, still triggering, but he was no longer an enemy. He was a human being, caught in suffering, doing his best with the understanding he had. He was worthy of compassion, just as everyone was worthy of compassion, including the traveler sitting here with anger and hurt and fear coursing through a nervous system that had learned long ago to protect through walls of hostility. After the practice concluded, the traveler and the old monk walked slowly through the covered corridor that circled the courtyard. The rain had stopped, leaving everything dripping and fresh. The monk spoke about metta as a practice of deconditioning the heart's automatic responses. We have been trained to divide the world into us and them, friend and enemy, deserving and undeserving, he said. This division creates endless suffering because it is based on the delusion of separation. Loving kindness practice gradually dissolves these false boundaries. We begin with ourselves, learning to wish our own well-being, which is surprisingly difficult for many who have internalized harsh self-judgment. Then we extend to those we love, which is easier. Then to neutral people we barely know. Then, most challengingly, to those we find difficult or who have harmed us. And finally, to all beings everywhere without exception. This is not naive or passive, the monk emphasized. We still maintain boundaries. We still protect ourselves and others from harm. We still speak truth and work for justice. But we do it without the poison of hatred, without the burning of aversion. We can say no to harmful behavior while still holding the person in compassion, recognizing their humanity even when we must oppose their actions. This is the fierce compassion that social justice requires, that parenting requires, that any ethical life requires. It is strong enough to confront harm, clear enough to see what needs changing, but not contaminated by the desire to punish or destroy. It seeks healing, not vengeance. It works for transformation, not retribution. And it begins with the simple practice of wishing well-being for all beings, including the ones we find most difficult. Over the following days, the traveler practiced metta during the morning meditation period, sitting with eyes closed and systematically extending loving kindness in all directions. May I be free from suffering. May I find peace. May I be happy. The words sometimes felt true, sometimes hollow, but the practice continued regardless of feeling, then extending to loved ones far away, family and friends not seen since arriving at the monastery. May you be free from suffering. May you find peace. May you be happy. Then to fellow practitioners here, including the critical monk who had triggered such strong aversion. And finally, to all beings everywhere, known and unknown, human and animal, and all forms of life. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings find peace. May all beings be happy. The practice worked in ways that were subtle but unmistakable. The critical monk remained critical, his behavior unchanged. But the traveler's response transformed completely. His harsh words no longer landed with the same wounding force. It became possible to hear the content of his feedback, which was sometimes actually useful, without being overwhelmed by hurt and defensiveness. And more remarkably, genuine care began to arise for this difficult man, noticing when he seemed tired or stressed, offering help with his tasks without being asked, meeting his harshness with gentleness rather than matching it with hostility. The old patterns of aversion still arose sometimes, but they no longer dominated. The heart had learned another way, a way of meeting difficulty without hardening, of maintaining openness even when confronted with abrasiveness. This was the antidote working, dissolving the poison slowly and steadily, replacing the habit of hatred with the capacity for compassion. One evening, after weeks of this practice, something extraordinary happened. The critical monk approached the traveler after the evening meal, his face softer than usual. "I have been harsh with you," he said quietly. "This has been my way, my attempt to help through correction. But I see now that it has caused pain. I am sorry." The traveler felt tears rising, not from hurt, but from the recognition of shared humanity, of the courage it took for this proud man to apologize, of the mysterious way that inner transformation seemed to change outer circumstances without any attempt to manipulate or control. "It is okay," came the response. "We are all learning. We are all doing our best." They stood together in silence, no longer separate, no longer divided by the walls of aversion, simply two human beings meeting in the vulnerability of acknowledging suffering and seeking to cause less of it. The antidote had worked, and the second poison, while not eliminated, had lost its power to rule the heart. Antidote to ignorance, clear seeing, and investigation. The final antidote proved to be the most subtle and profound. If generosity countered craving and compassion countered aversion, what countered ignorance? The answer, the old monk explained, was vipassana, insight meditation, the practice of clear seeing that penetrated appearances to reveal the true nature of reality. This was not about acquiring more information or building philosophical understanding, though study supported the practice. It was about direct investigation of experience, watching with precise attention how phenomena arose and passed away, seeing impermanence in real time, witnessing the constructed nature of self moment by moment. This was the antidote that addressed the root poison, and therefore the most important practice of all. The old monk intensified the meditation instruction. Until now, the emphasis had been on calming the mind, developing concentration, learning to rest in present moment awareness. This foundation was essential and would continue, but now another quality was being cultivated: investigative awareness, the clear seeing that looked carefully at the nature of experience itself. During sitting meditation, instead of simply resting in breath, the instruction was to notice carefully what was actually happening. When a sound arose, to recognize that there was hearing, but could a hearer separate from the hearing be found? When a thought appeared, to see that there was thinking, but could a thinker distinct from thoughts be located? When sensation emerged, to notice that there was feeling, but could a feeler independent of feelings be discovered? The traveler sat with this instruction, bringing fierce attention to the process of experience. A bird called outside the meditation hall. There was hearing. But where was the one who heard? Looking carefully, there was only the sound, the ear's response to vibration, the brain's processing, the recognition of bird call, the thought about bird. A chain of causation, but no separate self at the center receiving the experience. It was all just happening, arising and passing in awareness, with no solid entity to whom it occurred. The recognition was disorienting and liberating simultaneously. The sense of being a separate self that possessed experience was revealed as overlay, interpretation, habit of mind, not actual fact. What was actually occurring was simply experiencing, with no experiencer needed for it to happen. The same investigation applied to thoughts. A thought arose. I am doing this practice well. Immediately, the instruction was to examine this thought carefully. Who is the I that is doing well? Looking for that, I revealed nothing solid, only another thought, a mental construct, a pattern of thinking that had been repeated so often, it seemed like an entity. But it was not an entity. It was process, movement, arising and passing like everything else. And the thought about doing well was just another thought, appearing based on conditions, disappearing when conditions changed. Nothing permanent, nothing solid. Just the flowing river of mental activity with no separate self standing on the bank, watching it flow. The self was in the river, was made of the same water that was constantly moving and changing and never the same from moment to moment. Over the days and weeks of this intensive practice, the direct seeing deepened. Sitting in meditation became a laboratory where the three characteristics the Buddha had taught could be witnessed directly. Anicca, impermanence. Every sensation arising and passing, every thought appearing and dissolving, every breath beginning and ending, everything in constant flux with nothing remaining unchanged even for a moment. Dukkha, unsatisfactoriness or suffering. The subtle stress of trying to hold on to pleasant experience, the resistance to unpleasant experience, the dissatisfaction inherent in the constant grasping and aversion that arose from not seeing impermanence clearly. And anatta, not self. The complete absence of any findable, solid, separate, permanent entity at the center of experience. Just process, just flow, just the seamless arising and passing of phenomena in awareness. One morning during the sitting that occurred just before dawn, something shifted dramatically. The traveler had been watching breath, then sounds, then sensations in the body, then thoughts, all with the investigative awareness that had been cultivated. And suddenly, the sense of separation collapsed completely. There was no inside and outside, no self and other, no experiencer and experience, just experiencing itself, happening on its own, intimate and vast and empty of any solid reference point. A thought arose. This is it. This is awakening. And immediately, that thought was seen as just another thought, arising and passing, not more true or solid than any other. The seeing continued without a seer. The breathing continued without a breather. Sitting continued without someone sitting. It was terrifying and perfectly peaceful at once, groundless and utterly stable, empty and inconceivably full. The bell rang, ending the meditation period. Movement happened, the body rising, feet walking, but without the usual sense of someone doing these things. Just walking, just moving, just life living itself through this temporary configuration of matter and awareness. The old monk caught the traveler's eye as everyone filed out of the meditation hall and gave the slightest nod, as if seeing that something had shifted, that a door had opened that would never fully close again. They met later that morning in the teaching pavilion. The traveler tried to describe what had happened, stumbling over words that seemed inadequate to capture the experience. The monk listened with complete attention, then spoke carefully. What you touched is what Dogen Zenji called shikantaza, just sitting. What the Buddha experienced under the Bodhi tree, not a special state to achieve or hold on to, but the simple recognition of what has always been true. No self, no separation, just this. But do not mistake a glimpse for completion, the monk cautioned. What you saw is true, but the habits of self-centered thinking and perceiving run very deep. They will reassert themselves. The sense of being a separate self will return, probably already has. This is natural. Awakening is not one moment of seeing clearly, though that is important. It is the gradual wearing away of all the habits that obscure clear seeing, until eventually what you glimpsed becomes your stable resting place. Dogen said that practice and enlightenment are not two. We do not practice to become enlightened. We practice as the expression of the enlightenment that is already present. Your seeing this morning is encouragement, confirmation that the path is true. Now the work continues. integration. Living from this understanding even when the experience fades. This is the long, patient work of a lifetime. The traveler understood, or began to. The insight had been profound, but already the familiar sense of being a separate self was reassembling itself, the mind constructing the usual reference points and divisions. Yet something had changed permanently. Even as the old patterns returned, there was now a knowing that they were patterns, constructions, not ultimate truth. The ground of certainty about the solid separate self had been removed. What remained was more fluid, more open, more willing to question and investigate rather than assume. This was the antidote to ignorance working at its deepest level. Not replacing one belief system with another, but dissolving the habit of believing any story absolutely, remaining open to the flowing, changing nature of reality that defied all attempts to freeze it into fixed concepts. The practice of Vipassana continued with renewed dedication. Each sitting was an opportunity to see clearly, to investigate the nature of experience, to notice impermanence, to feel the subtle suffering of grasping and aversion, to look for the self and find only process. And gradually, the insights that had come in dramatic glimpses began to inform ordinary life. Washing dishes became an opportunity to notice that there was washing but no washer. Walking became a chance to see that there was movement but no mover. Conversations revealed that there were words and listening, but no solid entities speaking and hearing. Only the dance of communication happening between interconnected processes temporarily designated as separate people. The vision was shifting from solid things to flowing patterns, from permanent entities to temporary formations, from separation to intimacy. This was clear seeing dissolving the fundamental ignorance that had created all suffering. This was the antidote working. One evening, during the teaching session, the old monk spoke about the relationship between the three antidotes and the three poisons. Generosity counters craving by training the heart to open rather than grasp. Compassion counters aversion by training the heart to soften rather than harden. And insight counters ignorance by training the mind to see clearly rather than through the fog of delusion. But notice how all three antidotes support each other and ultimately address the same root. Generosity is easier when we see that there is no separate self that can be impoverished by giving. Compassion flows naturally when we recognize that we are not separate from those we wish to help. And insight deepens when the heart is already trained in openness and softness through generosity and compassion. They work together, supporting and reinforcing each other, gradually transforming the heart and mind from the prison of the three poisons to the freedom of clear seeing, open-heartedness, and wise engagement with life. As the weeks turned to months, the traveler could feel the transformation happening at a level deeper than conscious thought. The three poisons still arose, of course. Wanting still appeared. Aversion still surfaced. Confusion still clouded perception. But they no longer ruled. They were seen clearly for what they were, recognized as old habits, met with the appropriate antidote, allowed to move through and dissolve. And in the space left by their diminishing power, something else was growing. Peace that did not depend on circumstances. Joy that arose from simple presence rather than getting what was wanted. Love that extended in all directions without needing anything in return. Wisdom that saw clearly and responded appropriately without being caught in the compulsive patterns of grasping and aversion rooted in the delusion of separate selfhood. The path was working, the antidotes were dissolving the poisons, and the journey continued, deeper and deeper into the heart of freedom. Integration, living beyond the poisons. The seasons had changed during the traveler's time at the monastery. The summer heat that had been present upon arrival had given way to autumn's cooling. Leaves turned gold and red before falling to carpet the forest floor. The garden that had been full of growing plants was now being prepared for winter rest, the last harvest gathered. The soil amended with compost. Everything returning to the cycle of growth and decay and renewal. And like the seasons, the traveler had also changed, though the transformation was subtler than leaves turning color, deeper than weather patterns shifting. The change was in how life was met, how moments were inhabited, how the old patterns of suffering had been gradually replaced by something freer, more spacious, more at peace with things as they were. The days continued with their steady rhythm, rising before dawn for meditation, working in silence with full attention, eating meals with gratitude, studying the teachings, sitting again in the evening. The routines that had seemed strange and difficult at first had become natural, even precious. They created the container within which transformation became possible. But now there was something different in how the traveler moved through these activities. The meditation was no longer about achieving any particular state, but simply about being present with what was. The work was not separate from practice, but was itself the practice. Each movement an opportunity for awareness, for generosity, for meeting life without the filter of grasping or aversion. The meals were eaten with recognition of the web of interconnection that brought food to bowl. Everything had become teaching, had become practice, had become life lived with awakening rather than towards some future moment of awakening. One morning, the traveler was assigned to work in the kitchen, preparing vegetables for the afternoon meal. An older nun worked at the next counter, her hands moving with the precision of decades of practice, each cut clean and intentional. They worked in companionable silence. The only sounds the rhythm of knives on cutting boards and water running in the sink. At one point, the traveler reached for a knife and accidentally knocked a bowl of trimmed vegetables onto the floor. The immediate reaction was familiar. Contraction, embarrassment, self-judgment. The voice of the critical mind beginning its assault, clumsy, careless, always making mistakes. But now there was also awareness watching this reaction, seeing it clearly, recognizing the pattern. And with that recognition came a choice. Instead of being swept into the familiar spiral of aversion towards self, there was a pause, a breath. The traveler knelt to gather the scattered vegetables, and the nun knelt beside him to help. "It is okay," she said quietly. "This happens. Just part of working in a kitchen." Her simple acceptance, her lack of judgment, her matter-of-fact helpfulness created space for something different. No need to make this mean anything about worth or competence. Just vegetables on the floor being picked up, life continuing. They cleaned together, rinsed the vegetables that could be salvaged, and returned to work. The entire incident took less than 2 minutes. But something important had happened. The old pattern had arisen, had been seen clearly, and had not taken control. The poison had been recognized, and the antidote applied so quickly it was almost automatic. This was integration. This was the practice living itself through daily life. Later that day, the old monk invited the traveler to walk with him through the forest. They followed a narrow trail that wound between ancient trees, their trunks thick and gnarled with age. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in golden shafts, illuminating patches of moss and fern. They walked slowly, stopping frequently to notice details. A spider web beaded with dew, a fungus growing from a fallen log, the way light changed the color of leaves from dark green to luminous yellow. Finally, the monk spoke. "You have been here for many months now," he said. "The person who arrived is not the person who walks beside me today. What has changed?" The traveler thought carefully before responding. "I still have the same thoughts, the same reactions, the same patterns, but I am no longer controlled by them. There is space now, awareness of what is happening, choice in how to respond." The monk nodded. "This is the fruit of practice," he said. "Not the elimination of the human experience, but freedom within it. The three poisons will continue to arise for as long as this body lives and this mind functions. They are part of the conditioned human experience, but you have learned to recognize them when they appear, to see them clearly rather than being swept away by them, to apply the antidotes that prevent them from creating unnecessary suffering. This is not perfection. This is maturity of practice. This is what we call living beyond the poisons, not because they are gone, but because they no longer rule. They no longer convince you of their stories. They no longer drive your actions and reactions. You have found the middle way between being controlled by them and waging war against them. You simply see them, understand them, and let them move through. They emerged into a clearing where a small stream ran over smooth stones. Its sound, a gentle murmuring that seemed to come from the earth itself. The monk gestured to a flat rock by the water's edge, and they sat together. He continued speaking, his voice taking on a particular quality of importance. "Soon you will leave this monastery. You will return to the world where conditions are more challenging, where the pull of old patterns is stronger, where the support of community and routine is not present in the same way. This is the real test. Can what you have learned here continue in the midst of complexity, demands, relationships, work, all the conditions that originally brought you to seek refuge in this practice? This is where true integration happens, not in the protected space of the monastery, but in the messy reality of engaged life." The traveler felt both excitement and trepidation at these words. Part of the mind wanted to stay here forever, to continue in this supportive environment where practice was the central focus and distractions were minimal. But another part knew the monk was right. The teachings had to be tested in the laboratory of ordinary life. The freedom that had been discovered here had to prove itself sustainable when surrounded by complexity and challenge. Otherwise, it was just a temporary state achieved in special conditions, not the fundamental transformation the path promised. The monk seemed to sense these thoughts. "Remember," he said, "the practice is not about creating a perfect protected life where the three poisons never arise. It is about learning to meet whatever arises with wisdom and compassion. The world will give you countless opportunities to practice. Every difficulty is an invitation to apply what you have learned. Every arising of craving, aversion, or ignorance is a chance to recognize, to remember, to respond with the antidotes rather than being reactive." He picked up a small stone from the streambed, held it in his palm. "This stone has been shaped by water over thousands of years," he said. Each drop of water that flowed over it wore away a tiny bit of hardness, slowly revealing the smooth form you see now. Your practice works the same way. Each moment of recognizing the poisons and applying the antidotes wears away a bit of the conditioning, the habits, the patterns that create suffering. It is gradual. It requires patience, but it is inevitable if you maintain the practice. Do not be discouraged when old patterns return strongly. Do not think you have failed when you find yourself caught in craving or aversion or confusion. Simply recognize what is happening, apply what you have learned, and begin again. 1,000 times. 10,000 times. This is the path. This is how transformation happens. Slowly, patiently, inevitably, like water shaping stone. They sat by the stream as afternoon faded toward evening, the light changing from gold to amber to deep blue. The traveler felt gratitude almost too large for the chest to contain. For this place, for these teachings, for this monk who had guided with such patience and skill, for the community that had held space for this work, for the difficulties that had arisen and been met, for the insights that had come, for the slow, patient transformation that was still occurring, would always be occurring, was the very nature of a life committed to awakening. Finally, they rose to return to the monastery for evening meditation. As they walked back through the forest, now dim with approaching night, the monk spoke one last teaching. You came here carrying the 3 poisons without knowing what they were or how they worked. Now you know them intimately. You have seen how they create suffering. You have learned the antidotes. You have practiced integration. Now you will take all of this into the world, not as someone who has transcended human experience, but as someone who knows how to work skillfully with it. This is enough. This is exactly what is needed. Go with confidence. Go with compassion. Go with the clarity that has been cultivated here. And know that wherever you are, the practice continues, the path unfolds, and the possibility of freedom is always present, always available, always just one clear, seeing breath away. The last conversation before departure, carrying the teaching forward. The morning of departure arrived with clear skies and cool air that carried the first real hint of winter approaching. The traveler had packed the small bundle of possessions that would be carried back into the world, leaving behind the monastic robes for the simple clothes that had been stored away months ago. They felt strange now, like wearing someone else's garments, like putting on a costume for a role that no longer fit quite the way it once had. Everything was the same, yet everything was different. The monastery grounds that had been so foreign upon arrival now felt like home. The routines that had seemed difficult were now sources of stability and peace. And most significantly, the person preparing to leave was not the same person who had arrived, burdened and desperate, so many months before. After the morning meditation and a final shared meal with the community, the traveler sought out the old monk for a last conversation before beginning the journey back to ordinary life. They found him in the teaching pavilion, sitting beneath the Bodhi tree that grew at its edge, a tree planted generations ago by a previous teacher who had also learned these same truths and passed them forward. The monk gestured to the space beside him, and the traveler sat down, feeling the weight of this ending, this transition, this step from one way of being into another. They sat together in silence for a long time, watching leaves fall one by one from the tree's branches, each one spiraling down in its own unique pattern before coming to rest on the ground below. Finally, the traveler spoke, asking the question that had been forming for days. Do the 3 poisons still arise for you? After all these years of practice, after all this understanding, do you still experience craving, aversion, ignorance? The monk smiled, his eyes crinkling with warmth and something that might have been amusement. Of course, he said without hesitation. I am human. The body still prefers warmth to cold, still moves away from pain, still has preferences about food and comfort. The mind still makes mistakes, still sees partially, still gets confused. The difference is not that these things no longer arise. The difference is in the relationship to them when they do. I see them clearly now. I recognize them as old friends, familiar patterns, nothing more. They visit, they stay for a time, they leave. But they do not move in and redecorate. They do not take control of the house. The traveler felt relief at this honesty, at the acknowledgement that the path did not lead to some impossible perfection, but to something more humble and more real. How do you work with them when they arise strongly? The question continued. When the aversion is intense or the craving feels overwhelming. The monk looked out at the valley below, considering his response. I do not fight them anymore, he said. That was the mistake of my early practice, thinking I had to eliminate all afflictive states, had to achieve some pure condition free from all difficulty. That just created more suffering, more aversion toward my own humanity. Now, when they arise, I greet them. Hello, craving, you are here. Hello, aversion, I see you. Hello, confusion, welcome back. And then I breathe with them, make space for them, apply the antidotes if needed, or sometimes just let them be without doing anything. They are like weather moving through. Resisting them is like being angry at rain. It just makes you wet and miserable. Allowing them is like standing under an eaves, watching the rain, knowing it will pass as all weather passes. But what about when you return to the world? The traveler asked, the question that had been sitting heavy in the chest. What if the old patterns come back strongly when surrounded by all the triggers and conditioning that shaped them in the first place? What if everything learned here dissolves when faced with the complexity out there? The monk turned to look directly at the traveler, his gaze steady and full of compassion. The old patterns will return, he said. Not maybe, but certainly. You will find yourself caught in craving, in aversion, in confusion. You will forget what you have learned here. You will get swept away by reactivity. This is guaranteed. But here is what else is guaranteed. You now know it is possible to see clearly. You have tasted freedom. You understand the mechanism of suffering and how to work skillfully with it. So when you get caught, which you will also eventually remember. You will recognize what is happening. You will apply the teachings. And you will return to presence, to awareness, to the practice. Again and again. This is not failure. This is exactly the practice. The monk reached down and picked up one of the fallen leaves, held it up to the light. See how this leaf was once green, full of chlorophyll, drinking sunlight and making sugar for the tree. Now it is brown and dry and falling away. Did the leaf fail? No. It completed its cycle. It did what leaves do. They grow, they photosynthesize, they turn color, they fall, they return to soil to nourish the next generation. Your practice is like this. Sometimes you will be green and growing. Sometimes you will feel the colors changing, awareness deepening. Sometimes you will fall away from practice entirely. And sometimes you will return to the ground, to the basics, to begin again. All of this is natural. All of this is part of the path. Trust the cycle. Trust the process. Trust that each time you remember and return to awareness, the practice deepens, even if it does not feel that way. They sat together as the morning advanced toward midday, talking about practical matters. How to maintain daily meditation practice when surrounded by demands. How to find community for support and accountability. How to recognize when professional help might be needed for difficulties beyond the scope of meditation practice. how to balance engagement with the world and the need for regular retreat, for times of intensive practice, for returning to silence and solitude to renew and remember. The monk shared from his own experience of moving between monastery life and service in the broader world, the challenges and gifts of each, the way they informed and supported each other when held in right relationship. The conversation was tender and practical, the words of a teacher sending a student into the next phase of learning with all the support and guidance possible. As their time together drew to a close, the traveler asked one final question. What is the most important thing to remember? If you could leave me with just one teaching to carry forward, what would it be? The monk was quiet for a long moment, his hand resting on the trunk of the Bodhi tree, his eyes gazing at something far beyond what was visible. Finally, he spoke, and his voice carried the weight of all his years of practice, all his understanding, all his love for this path and for the ones who walked it. Remember that you are not your thoughts, not your feelings, not your story about who you are. You are the awareness in which all of that appears. Rest in that awareness as often as you can. Return to it 10,000 times if necessary. It is always here, always available, always free, always at peace. The three poisons arise in awareness, but they are not awareness. They are like clouds in the sky. The sky is never stained by clouds, never diminished by storms, never less than vast and open, regardless of what moves through it. You are the sky. Remember this. Rest in this. Live from this. And everything else will find its right place. They stood together, and the traveler bowed deeply, forehead touching the ground, a gesture of profound gratitude and respect. When rising, tears streamed down both cheeks, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of completion, of beginning, of the poignancy of this transition from one life to another, one understanding to another, one way of being to another. The monk placed both hands on the traveler's shoulders. Go well, he said. Practice diligently. Be kind to yourself and others. Remember that the path is not about perfection, but about presence. Not about never falling, but about getting up each time you do. You carry these teachings now. You are responsible for keeping them alive through your practice, through your life, through your presence in the world. This is a sacred trust. Honor it. And when you are ready, when the time is right, pass it forward to others who are seeking, who are suffering, who are ready to learn about the three poisons and how to live beyond their control. This is how the Dharma continues. This is how freedom spreads. One heart at a time. One moment of clear seeing at a time. One commitment to awakening at a time. The traveler walked slowly down the mountain path, turning back once to see the monastery gates, the roof lines of the halls, the old monk standing at the entrance, waving slowly in farewell. Then the path curved, trees blocked the view, and the monastery disappeared from sight. But it was not gone. It lived now in the heart, in the mind, in the body that had been shaped by months of practice. The teachings traveled forward in memory, in understanding, in the capacity to recognize the three poisons when they arose and to meet them with wisdom. The journey back into the world had begun. The old life was waiting, but it would be met by someone changed, someone awake in ways that had not been possible before. Someone carrying the precious transmission of teachings that had been preserved and passed down through countless generations, now continuing forward into whatever came next. The path unfolded with each step, the practice continued with each breath, and the possibility of freedom accompanied each moment, available always, just one clear seeing away from being realized fully. Now, let us return together to this moment, to this breath, to this body resting here in the quiet of this night. The journey through the monastery, through the teachings of the three poisons and their antidotes, has been a journey through your own heart, your own mind, your own patterns of suffering and freedom. The traveler in the story is you. The old monk is the wisdom that lives within you. The monastery is this very moment, this breath, this opportunity to see clearly and choose wisely. Everything you need has always been here, has always been accessible, has always been waiting for your attention to turn toward it. Take a slow breath now, feeling the air enter your body, feeling your chest and belly expand, then feeling the release as breath flows back out. Notice that breathing happens on its own. You do not have to force it or control it. The body knows how to breathe. Life knows how to live itself through you. This simple act of breathing is a miracle you have been performing since the moment you were born, without thought, without effort, just the natural intelligence of being alive expressing itself. You are already complete. You are already whole. Nothing needs to be added or taken away. This breath is enough. This moment is enough. You are enough exactly as you are. As your body settles deeper into rest, notice any places where tension is still being held. The shoulders, the jaw, the belly, the hands. Breathe into those places and allow them to soften. There is no need to hold anything tight anymore. No need to brace against life or protect against what might come. You can release the grip. You can open your hands. You can let the body rest completely, trusting the ground beneath you, trusting the support that is always here, trusting the vast process of life that has brought you to this moment and will carry you forward into whatever comes next. Soften, release, allow. Let yourself be held by something larger than your small story about who you are and what you need. The three poisons, craving and aversion and ignorance, will continue to arise in your life. This is not failure. This is not a problem to be solved. This is simply the human experience, the conditioned patterns that all beings share. But now you have seen them clearly. You understand how they work. You know the antidotes. When craving arises, you can remember generosity and contentment. When aversion appears, you can remember compassion and acceptance. When ignorance clouds your seeing, you can remember to investigate, to look carefully, to question your assumptions about what is real. These tools are always available. This wisdom is always accessible. You are never without the capacity to respond skillfully to whatever arises in your experience. And most importantly, you can remember who you truly are beneath all the stories and patterns and conditioning. You are not the small separate self that the mind constructs. You are the vast open awareness in which all experience arises and passes. You are the sky, not the clouds. You are the ocean, not the waves. You are the space in which life unfolds, not separate from life, but intimate with every moment, every breath, every experience. Rest in this knowing. Return to it again and again. Let it be your home, your refuge, your deepest truth. From this resting place, you can meet whatever comes with presence, with wisdom, with the freedom that was never lost, but only temporarily forgotten. As you prepare to surrender fully to sleep, to that mysterious state where consciousness releases its grip and the body repairs and restores itself, know that this too is practice. Letting go into sleep is practice in letting go into life, into death, into the constant releasing that reality requires. You cannot hold on to waking consciousness. It will dissolve whether you consent or not. But you can meet that dissolution with trust, with willingness, with the understanding that what you truly are is never lost, never diminished, never absent. Sleep well, knowing you are held. Rest deeply, knowing you are safe. Dream peacefully, knowing you are loved by the very fact of your existence, by the mystery that chose to express itself as you, by the universe experiencing itself through your particular perspective. If these words have touched something true inside you, if this journey through the teachings has offered you even a moment of peace or clarity or hope, return to this space whenever you need it. This refuge is always here. The teachings are always available. The path is always open. You are always welcome. Subscribe to keep this sanctuary within reach, to remember that you have a place to come when the world feels overwhelming, when the three poisons seem too strong, when you need to be reminded of who you truly are beneath all the conditioning. This is your space. This is your practice. This is your birthright as a being capable of awakening. Honor it by returning. Honor it by practicing. Honor it by living with as much presence and kindness as you can manage in each moment. And now, as this meditation comes to its natural close, as these words fade into the silence from which they arose, let yourself sink fully into rest. There is nothing more you need to do tonight, nothing to achieve, nothing to become, nowhere to go, no one to be, just this body breathing softly in the darkness, just this awareness resting in its own nature. Just this moment, complete and perfect, exactly as it is. The three poisons have been seen, the antidotes have been learned, the path has been walked, and what remains is simply this, simply being, simply the profound miracle of existence expressing itself as you. Rest in that. Sleep in that. Be held by that. And when morning comes, when consciousness returns, begin again. One breath, one moment, one clear seeing at a time. This is the practice. This is the path. This is enough. Good night. Rest well. Be at peace. You are held by something vast and loving that has no name but feels like coming home. Sleep now, dear traveler. Sleep now, dear friend. You have done well. You are exactly where you need to be. And the journey continues tomorrow, fresh and new. Another opportunity to live beyond the poisons. Another chance to remember who you truly are. Until then, rest. Deeply, completely, peacefully rest. The monastery is always within you. The teacher is always speaking. The path is always unfolding, and you are always, always free. Good night.